To understand how we got here, we have to go back 2 months. Spring was just beginning to show its face, warming up the empire after a long, brutal winter. The chill was fading, and life was returning to the palace gardens. It was a time of massive change, and the MC could feel the shift in the air with every sip of his tea. He sits there calmly, but his red eyes are as sharp as ever, tracking every movement in the palace. Everything felt new, but there was an underlying tension that was hard to put into words. A red envelope is slid across the table, an invitation that carries a lot of weight. Alan Manisil picks it up, noting that this is the second time he's been personally invited by the king himself. The king warns him with a smirk that he better not toss this one aside like he did last year. Alan laughs it off, saying he's stuck in the capital anyway, but he's still caught off guard by how fast time is moving. The king remembers how Alan literally barged into the palace around this time last year, starting all this madness. He glances over at his son, wondering what kind of chaos this year will bring. As the sun shines through the window, they both know the peace won't last much longer. Suddenly, a massive spike of ice magic tears through the air with a deafening whistle. Callian reacts in a flash, his practice sword glowing as he deflects the lethal frost. Arsene Hertz is across the field, throwing high-level spells like they're nothing, testing the prince's limits. The MC dodges the ice shards, his movements fluid and precise as he readies his own counterattack. He concentrates, and a ripple of pure power flows through his hands, shimmering like water. The ice crashes against his energy shield, shattering into a million pieces with a loud clang. Callian doesn't wait. He dashes forward, his blade becoming a blur of blue light as he slashes through the air. Arsene's eyes widen as the prince closes the gap in a heartbeat, his speed almost too fast for a mage to track. The MC's gaze is intense, his focus entirely on breaking through Arsene's defenses. Arsene tries to bring up a shield, but Callian's blade pierces right through the mana barrier. The shield shatters into fragments, leaving the elite mage completely wide open. Arsene gulps, feeling the cold edge of the energy blade right at his throat. He knows it's over and immediately yields, a drop of sweat rolling down his face as he realizes just how strong the MC has become. Callian lets the energy fade and offers a hand, thanking Arsene for the good sparring session. Arsene is genuinely impressed. He asks how the MC managed to teleport like that without even saying an incantation. He notes that Callian broke the shield without actually hurting him, which takes an insane amount of control, but the MC just smiles that chilling smile of his, causing Arsene to freeze up. He tells Arsene that he wasn't actually holding back, he plays to kill, and that's why his control is so perfect. The other mages of the Valken rush over, begging Arsene to teach them how to use such high-level magic. Callian walks over to where Planchch is sitting on a bench and asks if he enjoyed the little show. Planchch looks away, acting unimpressed, but the MC isn't letting him off that easily. He leans in, asking his brother if he's ever thought about taking a more active role. He suggests that Planchch should start training the mages himself instead of just watching from the sidelines. Callian thinks back to the other timeline, where the Valken were just tools for the king, but he wants them to be something more. He remembers a dark figure from the past, someone who turned these mages into literal demons on the battlefield. He looks at Planchch, knowing his brother is the only one who can decide if these mages become heroes or monsters. The MC smirks, seeing the gears turning in Planch's head. Planchch tries to act tough, saying he's got enough power already, but his body language says otherwise. Kiri arrives with a message. Marquis Evan Burison is at the palace and is demanding an audience with the prince. Callian isn't in any rush. He tells Kiri to let the Marquis wait, knowing exactly why the noble is here. He turns back to Planchch, reminding him that the world now knows they're on the same side. His tone turns deadly serious as he warns Planchch that he can't hide in his shadow forever. If he stays weak, the enemies in the palace will find him, and he'll be an easy target. Planchch sits in silence, the weight of his brother's words finally sinking in as he stares at the ground. Callian heads toward the audience hall, knowing Evan Burison has spent all winter training just to face him. The MC has his true aura masked with magic for now, hoping to trick the Marquis into thinking he's still weak. But as he walks, he realizes he can't pick up on Evan's aura either, which means the Marquis has been doing some serious training of his own. The real problem is that Planchch doesn't have a faction yet, making him a vulnerable piece on the board. The MC knows the true game for the crown is just beginning, and it's going to be a bloodbath. The chess pieces are set, the princes and the nobles are all ready to tear each other apart for that throne. Suddenly, Callian stops in his tracks as he senses someone nearby. He curses his bad timing, realizing he's about to run into the one person he wanted to avoid today. He bows his head slightly, acknowledging his superior with a cold, "Brother." He has to admit, the presence of the man in front of him is suffocating. It's Prince Randall, and as he looks at his brother, Callian almost wishes he had helped him back in the past life. The two princes stand on the grand staircase, a literal and metaphorical gap between them. Randall stands there silently, looking down at Callian as if he's nothing more than a nuisance. Callian catches the subtle shift in Randall's posture, just 3 steps, and the first prince has already revealed his true feelings. Randall asks about a legendary rose that was said to bloom forever, his voice cold and detached. Our boy doesn't back down, telling Randall that he finally understands exactly what that metaphor meant. Randall seems surprised for a split second, wondering if Callian actually saw through his mask. He starts to descend the stairs, each step echoing through the silent hall like a ticking clock. The MC realizes that Randall's goal isn't change, it's to remain beautiful and perfect without ever shifting his stance. He stands his ground as Randall reaches the bottom, the two brothers finally seeing eye to eye. The tension is thick enough to cut with a knife as they stand inches apart. Randall confirms that was indeed the idea, his blue eyes showing absolutely no emotion, but Callian just bluntly tells him that he has no interest in playing along with that kind of philosophy. Later that day, Alan Manisil praises Callian for handling the situation so well. Alan jokes that maybe next time he should just invite Randall and the Marquise together so they can all be friends. The MC just calmly eats his chocolate, noting that at least the candy is delicious even if the politics are bitter. Alan sighs, wondering where else he could find a disciple who is this much of a handful. Callian tells him not to worry, he isn't just sharpening his sword without a plan. Alan stops, his expression turning curious as he listens to what the prince has to say. The MC explains that Randall won't make a move until he's absolutely sure Callian has completely abandoned the Brizzen family. He drops a chocolate on the table, using it as a prop for his next strategic lesson. He knows the nobles are still cautious, because they can't quite gauge the full extent of his sword aura yet. Since he's joined forces with Planchch, the Burisan family is scrambling to figure out which side they should be on. The Marquise is currently looking for a new rope to hang onto to save his status, but Callian smiles, clenching his fist. He has no intention of being the rope that saves them. Night falls, and the scene shifts to the rough parts of the city, smelling of cheap alcohol and trouble. A rowdy crowd is cheering inside an underground bar, screaming for blood as they watch a fight. A hooded figure tries to walk past, but a thug blocks his way, demanding a toll. The figure doesn't say a word, his cloak fluttering as he prepares to move. In a flash of steel, the thug is down before he can even blink. It's Kiri Baron, and he remembers Callian's order to handle the business that the prince can't touch. He cuts through the room with terrifying efficiency, his heterochromatic eyes glowing with a cold light as women scream in the background. He warns them not to touch the help, standing over a fallen body while the crowd panics and tries to flee. They release the fighting dogs from their cages, desperate, bloodied men used for entertainment. The thugs draw their swords, shouting at Kiri and demanding to know who the hell he thinks he is. Back in the palace, Callian is still talking with Alan, his mind perfectly synced with the violence happening miles away. Kiri is a whirlwind of destruction, his blade carving through the thugs as blood splatters across the floor. The MC's voice echoes over the action. We kill all of them. A final strike ends the last thug instantly, his body slumping to the ground with a dull thud. Kiri stands alone in the wreckage, his breathing steady as he looks toward the back office. He walks toward the door, his shadow stretching across the blood-stained wood. His eyes are sharp, noticing every tiny detail of the room as he enters. He stops in front of a heavy door, sensing someone hiding on the other side. He kicks the door open, but he's met with a frantic OH as a man holds a woman at knife point. The thug screams at him to stay back, threatening to kill the girl if Kiri takes another step. But Kiri noticed something earlier, two muffled sounds when he entered the office. The hostage is actually whispering to the thug, telling him to take her behind the building. Kiri realizes they're in on it together and doesn't hesitate. He lunges forward and strikes! The thug collapses, coughing up blood, realizing too late that his little trick didn't work. Kiri stands over him, his blade dripping with blood, looking like a literal god of death. He tells the dying man that it doesn't matter who sent them. A final spray of red finishes the job as Kiri cleans up the last of the witnesses. Suddenly, the front door is kicked open by the city guards, led by a panicked captain. They find themselves in a house of slaughter, staring at the hooded man standing in the center of the corpses. The captain shouts for him to drop the sword, his voice shaking with pure fear. Kiri calmly lets his blade hit the floor with a clang and begins to speak. He looks them dead in the eye, blood splattered and cold, as he identifies himself as Prince Callian's personal attendant. The night is silent except for the frantic thundering of hooves as a messenger desperately races toward the Burisan estate. The illegal gambling den is a literal graveyard now, the floor stained red after Kiri's one-man massacre. The messenger is sweating bullets, the gravity of the raid weighing on him as he prepares to deliver the worst news possible. He bursts through the palace gates, his horse nearly collapsing from the sheer speed of the journey. He nearly runs over the guards in his panic, screaming for an audience with the Marquise immediately. High above, our MC watches the chaos with a satisfied smirk hidden under his hood. Callian looks down at the frantic messenger, wondering exactly where the man thinks he's going in such a rush. Inside the study, the news hits like a physical blow, leaving the noble in total shock. A teacup shatters against the floor as hot liquid sprays everywhere, mirroring the explosive temper of the man behind the desk. Evan Burison is absolutely livid, flipping his desk in a fit of rage while his subordinates tremble in fear. He roars at them, furious that their delayed report forced the royal family to step in on a matter that should have been handled quietly by the police. Everything went south the moment Kiri revealed himself as Prince Kalyan's personal attendant, and Evan knows someone has to pay for this disaster. The subordinate knows his life is on the line, cowering as he realizes the Marquise is looking for a scapegoat. Kalyan, watching the fallout from the shadows, knows the noble house is now backed into a corner. Evan realizes his plan to isolate Kalyan has failed, and worse, Kalyan seems to have successfully turned Prince Planchch to his side. He can't believe that his attempts at persuasion have fallen through so spectacularly. The report gets even worse. Apparently, the one who raided the den explicitly told everyone to blame Prince Planchch for the fallout. Evan is confused. He thought Kalyan and Planchch were playing nice, but this raid makes it look like there's still major friction between the brothers. Realizing they need to cut their losses, Evan decides to pin the entire gambling operation on Viscount Garras to protect the Burison name. As he stares out the window, a chilling reflection of Kalyan's eyes seems to watch him from the darkness of the night. Evan vows to head to Chermil Palace at first light to deal with this mess personally. The sun rises over the beautiful palace spires, but the political storm is only just beginning. Kalyan watches through the glass as Evan arrives, precisely as he predicted. He explains to Planchch that the betrayal during the raid was a calculated move to make the nobles think there's still a rift between the two princes. Planchch sips his tea, looking amused, while Evan puts on a show of fake sympathy for the stress the prince must be under. The MC knows Evan's name wouldn't be in the ledgers anyway, so the goal was always to strip away their influence by taking out their pawns. Kalyan pivots the conversation, asking Planchch if he's finally made up his mind about the proposal he made earlier. Our boy acts all innocent, playing dumb about what he suggested, while Planchch just lets out a tired sigh. The room goes quiet as Planchch stares into his tea, the weight of the decision clear on his face. Then, a small, genuine smile breaks across his face. He's finally ready to step up. He sets his cup down firmly and says the one word that changes everything: Valken. Kalyan grins, his red eyes flashing with excitement as his master plan for his brother falls into place. Planchch officially agrees to take charge of the mage unit, finally claiming his own source of power in the palace. The fallout is brutal. Viscount Garras is stripped of everything, serving as the perfect distraction for the Burison's crimes. Kiri is given a 2-month suspension as a slap on the wrist for using his sword outside the palace, though it's really just a vacation. 2 months pass in a flash, and the capital is buzzing with the arrival of a massive foreign delegation. Kalyan wakes up in his luxury bed, looking refreshed after the long wait. His attendant asks if he's still dreaming, but the MC's mind is already working at 100 miles per hour. He mentions having a dream he can't quite remember, but his heart is pounding with a strange sense of anticipation. It's a feeling of pure excitement, like something monumental is about to happen. He wonders if it's because Kiri finally returned from his punishment the night before. But then he hears something interesting. Kiri reported a strange detail about the arriving guests. Kalyan stops mid-sip, his eyes narrowing as he listens to the news. Outside, a pair of regal boots steps onto the palace grounds, signaling the arrival of someone truly important. Planchch is out in the garden and notices something off. Tencel has sent way more priests than usual for a standard visit. He decides he needs to warn Kalyan, but he's stopped in his tracks by a presence he wasn't expecting. Planchch looks up, his expression turning from confusion to utter shock. He can only mutter a single question to the man standing before him: "Why are you here?" A man with long, flowing silver hair walks toward him, the Crown Prince of Sicia. Sicia smiles, his purple eyes sparkling with hidden depth as he greets Planchch, and just like that, the world of the MC is about to be flipped upside down. The banner of Sicia burns with an intense light, a symbol of a kingdom that was supposed to be a memory. High on the palace walls, the silhouette of a prince looks out over a land that isn't his own. Planchch can't wrap his head around it. Why would the Crown Prince of Sicia come all this way in person? Chase simply smiles, claiming he came to offer his congratulations, but he mentions he's also here to meet someone special. Suddenly, Kalyan arrives on his dark horse, pulling the reins so hard the beast rears up into the air. The MC stops dead, his hand trembling as he stares at the silver-haired man standing in the garden. He finally understands why his heart was racing all morning. It was a premonition of this reunion. Back in the palace, Alan Manisil nearly chokes when he hears the news of who just arrived. The attendant confirms it. Crown Prince Chase of Sicia is officially on the palace grounds. Alan's expression darkens. He knows this meeting could expose everything Kalyan is trying to hide. He hears that Chase is expected at the royal luncheon and immediately bolts out the door to intercept them. Alan curses under his breath, wishing King Romain would have given him at least a little bit of time to prepare for this. The sound of heavy boots echoes through the hallway as the VIPs approach the dining hall. Alan is frantic, knowing that Kalyan isn't ready to face his past life's brother in front of the entire court. The doors swing open, and the attendant announces the arrival of the third prince, Kalyan. Kalyan walks in, his back straight, but inside he's absolutely reeling from the shock. As the door creaks open, his red eyes lock onto Chase, and his heart begins to thud painfully in his chest. He knows he's going to be shaken, no matter how much he tries to play it cool. Chase looks up, and for a second, time seems to stop as the two brothers from different lives lock eyes. Chase looks exactly as Callion remembers him, regal, kind, and overwhelmingly familiar. The MC takes a step forward, every muscle in his body feeling heavy as he approaches the man who used to be his everything. His boots click against the polished floor, a lonely sound in the sudden silence of the room. Chase breaks the tension first, extending a hand and saying he's really wanted to meet the famous Prince Callion. They stand face to face, the height difference making the young Callion look small against his older brother's presence. Chase notices Callion's hesitation and calls out his name again, wondering if something is wrong. The MC clenches his jaw, fighting back a wave of raw emotion that threatens to break his mask. He finally manages to speak, admitting that he feels the exact same way about this meeting. Chase leans in, his purple eyes searching Callion's face with an intensity that's almost frightening. Callion finally says the name aloud, Crown Prince Chase, and the weight of the moment is almost too much to bear. Suddenly, the door bursts open again as a gasping Alan Manhwa finally catches up. He sees them standing together and asks what's going on, clearly terrified of what might have already been said. Chase greets Alan warmly, but the Archmage isn't in the mood for small talk and insists they move inside immediately. Callion leads the way, his mind a complete whirlwind of confusion and nostalgia. He asks if he can visit Chase in his office after lunch, needing to talk to him away from prying eyes. As he walks away, Callion takes a deep breath, trying to steady his ragged breathing. He knows he's playing a dangerous game, but seeing Chase again has reawakened feelings he thought were dead. Later, Planchch waits outside the office, looking concerned about his brother's strange behavior. He stares off into the distance, sensing that the arrival of the Secretion Prince has changed the atmosphere of the entire palace. Inside the private room, 2 cups of tea sit on the table, their steam rising in the quiet air. Alan sits across from Chase, his arms crossed as he cuts straight to the point. He knows congratulations aren't the real reason Chase came all this way and asks what he's actually after. Chase sips his tea, admitting that he can't fool a master mage like Alan. He says he's not sure if Alan will even believe him, but he's the only one who might actually listen. Alan leans forward, his expression intense as he tells the prince he's listening. Chase drops a term that makes Alan's heart stop, the axis of time. He asks if Alan remembers when he told him that the legendary artifact had suddenly disappeared from Sicia. Alan remembers it clearly. About a year ago, Chase sought his counsel regarding the missing treasure. He had visited Sicia secretly but couldn't find a single trace of the Arcus Tempus, realizing it wasn't a human-made object. Alan was the one who relayed that devastating news to Callion, which had sent the MC into a spiral. But Chase has a new piece of the puzzle. He reveals that he was actually there the day the axis disappeared. He confesses that for the past few months, strange and unfamiliar memories have been surfacing in his mind. It started like a dream, fuzzy and distant, but it refused to go away. At first, he thought he was just dreaming, or perhaps losing his mind from the stress of the missing artifact. But eventually, the memories became so vivid and consistent that he had no choice but to believe them. He clenches his hands together, his voice trembling as he admits he's remembering things he's already lived through. The weight of the truth is visible in his eyes as he looks at Alan. He says the words that change everything. He knows his brother Byrne is alive and right here in this kingdom. Alan is completely speechless, staring at Chase with wide eyes as the realization hits him. He carefully asks a follow-up question, needing to know the extent of Chase's involvement. He asks if Chase, by any chance, tried to use the Arcus Tempus to bring his brother back from the dead. Chase is offended by the suggestion, calling it preposterous while remembering the brutal war that started over the artifact. He recalls the fire and the blood, where nations fought like animals just to claim the Arcus Tempus as their own. He remembers the tragic sight of Byrne giving his life just to keep the power of time from being misused. Chase would never undo that sacrifice just to satisfy his own grief. He respects his brother's memory too much for that. He swears he guarded the artifact to the very end and never once tried to use it for himself. Alan nods, realizing that this explanation perfectly aligns with what the legendary Suspanian told Callion before. But there's still one lingering detail that doesn't quite fit the picture. Chase mentions the look he saw on Prince Callion's face today, and it was a look he could never forget. He realized in that moment that he couldn't let Callion find out that he still remembers their past. Knowing that his brother is alive and well in this new life is enough of a miracle for him. Alan looks at Chase, wondering just what kind of difficult path these two brothers are destined to walk together. Chase composes himself, ready to move on, but the mood in the room remains heavy with the secret. Kiri enters the room and bows respectfully, breaking the private conversation between the mage and the prince. He delivers a message from Callion, saying the prince wants to speak with Alan privately after dinner. Alan laughs it off to hide his panic, nervously asking if Kiri was eavesdropping on their conversation. The chibi Kiri just stares back blankly while Alan internally screams at himself for not casting a silence spell. He sighs, realizing there's no use crying over split milk now that the damage might be done. Alan introduces Kiri to Chase, identifying him as Prince Callion's personal bodyguard. Chase is intrigued, noting that it's rare for a prince's knight to not be from a famous noble family. Kiri looks up, his gaze steady as he prepares to reveal his identity to the Secretion prince. He says his last name is Burn, and the word hits Chase like a lightning bolt. Chase asks if Kiri knows that the name has been passed down through the Secretion royal line for generations. Kiri says no, while Chase smiles warmly at the name that means everything to him. He explains that Burn means the hero whose name will never fade, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful love. Later, Callion stands by the window, wondering what Chase's presence will ultimately mean for the future of Kairos. The MC is lost in thought, questioning what his next step should be now that his past has literally walked into his front door. He clenches his fist, terrified that everything he's done to stop the upcoming war might be for nothing. A knock at the door startles him, and Planchch walks in, demanding a real explanation for Callion's behavior. Planchch notes that a foreign prince shows up, and suddenly his little brother looks like a ghost. Callion looks at him, his face pale as he considers the possibility of history repeating itself. He starts to pose a hypothetical scenario to his brother, his voice low and serious. He asks Planchch what he would do if there was something he wanted more than anything, but someone else had already claimed it. He asks his brother directly, "What would you do?" Planchch stares at him, his light blue eyes searching for the meaning behind the cryptic question. The two brothers walk through the palace, the atmosphere between them more tense than ever before. Planchch scoffs, saying he doesn't make a habit of taking things that don't belong to him. But Callion pushes further, asking what if it's something he truly, desperately needs to survive. Planchch listens intently, realizing his brother is talking about something much deeper than just politics. The MC's red eyes are full of a desperate kind of honesty as he waits for an answer. Planchch simply says, "Of course," confirming his unwavering principles. Callion smiles, calling it food for thought, but the relief in his eyes is palpable. He admits to himself that he was shaken to his core because Chase is the one person from his old life he truly missed. But there was never a clear answer to this mess from the very beginning. He looks at Planchch, knowing this version of his brother has no idea about the tragedy that's coming. Planchch isn't letting it go though, and demands that Callion finally start explaining everything. The MC snaps his fingers and casts a powerful silence spell that envelopes the entire room in a shimmering dome. He reminds Planchch of the time he asked who Callion really was and says he thinks his brother has already figured it out. The room goes dead quiet as Callion begins the story that spans 2 lifetimes. He drops the truth: the world's clock was rewound 10 years into the past by the Queen of the Gods, Serenity. Planchch's eyes widen in absolute shock as the impossible reality begins to set in. Callion delivers the final blow. He was the brother of Chase Sicia in that past life, and now he's Planchch's brother. He vows that if there is no path forward, he will find a way to forge his own. The heavy silence of the office is broken as Callion finally tells Alan he can speak his mind. Alan isn't thrilled, pointing out that yet another person now knows the MC's world-altering secret. Callion swears that Planchch was the last one on the list, trying to reassure his mentor that the circle of trust is closed. He explains that he only told his brother the essentials, that he's a regressor and used to be Chase's brother. He remembers the weight of those words, telling Planchch that while he was once a Secretion, he is a Kairos prince now. Alan just scoffs and lets out a laugh, clearly amused by how much of a handful his apprentice is. He brushes his hair back, getting serious and asking what Callion actually wants from him this time. Callion mentions a request for Yuria, hoping Alan can look out for the girl in his stead. Alan notices the distant look in the MC's eyes and asks if there's something else bothering him. Callion looks toward the window, admitted that he can't stop thinking about the person who's always watching them from the shadows. His mind is locked on Randall and those 30 suspicious priests who just arrived from Tansel. The timing is just too perfect to be a simple diplomatic visit, and the MC knows it. He sighs, feeling the massive weight of all these conflicting plots resting on his shoulders. A memory of Chase's kind face flashes in his mind, a reminder of what he's fighting to protect. Callion lets out a small chuckle, finding irony in the fact that his past and present are colliding so violently. He knows his brothers are never going to give him a moment of peace to actually process any of this. The scene shifts to the garden, where Planchch runs into Chase, looking as grumpy as ever. Chase's attendant follows closely behind, watching the interaction between the two princes. Chase explains he had some free time before the banquet and got the king's permission to admire the scenery. Planchch just tsk and turns away, his body language radiating pure annoyance. Chase catches the vibe and notes with a smile that he clearly isn't Planchch's favorite person right now. Planchch scoffs, demanding to know the real reason a crown prince would travel all this way just for a visit. He stares Chase down, asking if he's really just here to see Lord Manhwa or if there's a darker motive. Chase changes the subject, mentioning how Planchch has been very invested in training those Valkan mages lately. Planchch is taken aback, wondering how Sicia knows so much about the internal military affairs of Kiri. Chase just offers a mysterious smile, his eyes hiding a mountain of secrets. Suddenly, the air gets cold as Chase asks if this new mage unit is meant to be Planchch's personal power base. His purple eyes pierce through Planchch, searching for the truth behind the younger prince's sudden ambition. Chase clenches his fist, his voice dropping as he warns Planchch about the dangers of gathering such power. Planchch goes quiet, realizing he's being interrogated by a master of the game. Chase's eyes widen in realization as he looks at Planchch, seeing something he didn't expect. Planchch rubs his head, admitting that he must have done something pretty significant in that other version of the future. He steps forward, telling Chase that it seems he's not as clueless as everyone thinks he is. Planchch assures him that the Valkans serve Kalyan, not him, making his loyalty clear. Chase watches him walk away, whispering that he hopes Planchch is right, for everyone's sake. The afternoon sun hits the palace towers, but the bright light can't hide the dark schemes brewing inside. Back in his room, Kalyan is reviewing a document, his brow furrowed in concentration. The report is shocking. There is absolutely no record of anyone named Malcolm Chetish among the priests sent to Kiri. If this Malcolm guy is operating in the city but isn't on the official envoy list, Kalyan knows Tansel is up to something illegal. Jan enters, announcing that the banquet is starting soon and the MC needs to get ready. But Kalyan stops him, asking Jan to sit down because they need to have a serious talk. He explains his suspicion. Tansel sent 30 priests, and he has a gut feeling that Randall is pulling the strings. None of the priests already stationed in Kiri were invited, which is a huge red flag for a religious celebration. He asks Jan why the Haladam would send that many practitioners of divine magic to a simple birthday party. Chibi Jan just looks confused, his brain short-circuiting as he tries to keep up with the MC's logic. Kalyan realizes Jan doesn't get it, and explains that Tansel shouldn't even be able to spare that many priests right now. Jan remembers that Tansel had massive flooding and rainfall this year, which usually causes a lot of internal trouble. Exactly. The MC notes that Kiri even sent them salt reserves for their relief efforts. He pauses, a horrifying thought beginning to take shape in his mind. Floods always bring plague and disease, meaning Tansel should be desperate for every healer they have. With their own people dying in the streets, there is no way a sane ruler would send 30 top-tier healers abroad. The image of a dark, smiling figure in a hood appears. Kalyan realizes these men aren't priests at all. He berates himself for not seeing the obvious truth sooner. A sharp smirk crosses his face as the pieces of Randall's plan finally click into place. They might be wearing the robes of the holy, but their hands are built for something else entirely. Kalyan concludes with a chilling thought. Those 30 men aren't priests, they're soldiers. The MC walks down the long palace corridor, his mind sharp and focused on the upcoming confrontation. He spots Hina and her sister hovering near a doorway, looking incredibly nervous as they wait for him. Kalyan asks if the cat got in again, noticing Hina's panicked expression as she clutches her dress. The chibi MC tells them to move aside while Hina frantically apologizes for the intrusion. He steps into the room, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of trouble. He slams the door shut with a loud bang, surprising the girls outside with his sudden intensity. He tells them to just leave it for today, promising to send the message down later. The girls scurry away, the sound of their footsteps fading as Kalyan prepares for the night's main event. He grips the handle of the next door, his knuckles turning white as he readies his prince persona. Inside, a white kitten is lounging on a table next to an expensive-looking jewelry box. Kalyan enters his room, a confident smile on his face as he looks at his small pet. The cat rubs against his leg while he mutters that he has something very important to tell his brother. Planchch is already there, looking sharp in his royal attire as he sighs at whatever new scheme Kalyan is cooking up. The MC drops the bomb. He's figured out that Randall is using 30 fake priests to infiltrate the palace. His red eyes glow with a dangerous light as he admits he absolutely hates being manipulated by someone like Randall. The banquet hall is massive and glowing with light as the announcer screams the names of the two arriving princes. The noble ladies are stunned, whispering behind their fans as they see the once rival brothers walking in together. It's an official declaration to the entire court. The two princes have joined forces, and the balance of power has shifted. The nobles can't look away, sensing that this is more than just a family reunion. High on the balcony, Prince Randall watches them, looking down with a wine glass in hand and a cold, unreadable expression. He takes a slow sip, his eyes never leaving Kalyan as the MC stares right back at him from the floor. Kalyan knows this move will force Randall to hesitate, keeping his rival from making any easy plays for a while. Planchch asks if this stunt is enough, and Kalyan grins, saying it's a perfect start to tie up everyone's attention. Planchch notices Kalyan looking around the room and asks what he's searching for. The MC notes that there's someone very specific who should be at this banquet, but is suspiciously missing. Planchch asks who it is, his face turning serious as he senses another layer to the plot. Kalyan points a finger toward the empty space where the Burison family should be. Marquise Evan is nowhere to be found. Under the bright moonlight outside, the palace gardens are quiet, but the air is thick with tension. A hooded figure whispers to a companion, asking if they've been followed into the darkness. The figure confirms they're clear, but he notes that the lack of security doesn't seem like a coincidence. In the shadows, a group of men is moving with military precision, avoiding the light of the torches. They sneak through the garden, their long cloaks fluttering as they head toward a side entrance. An order is whispered. When Randall leaves the banquet hall, follow him. Suddenly, a foot steps on a dry branch, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent night. The branch snaps completely under the weight of the intruder. A guard stops, his eyes narrowing as he looks up into the trees where a cloaked Kiri is hiding. Kiri's heart pounds as he realizes he's been spotted. These priests have senses that are way too sharp. The guards draw their weapons, screaming, "Who's there?" as a panicked servant girl shrieks in terror. Randall appears, looking completely unbothered as the servant begs for forgiveness for her outburst. His attendant leans in, his face obscured by glasses as he whispers about their true objective. He clarifies that Randall isn't the one they should be worried about right now. He points out that they just need to confirm one vital piece of information. The priests gather around the attendant, their faces hidden in the shadows of their deep hoods. A dark, purple energy begins to leak from one of the cloaked men, radiating a terrifying killing intent. Kiri is sweating, realizing these guys are sensing his presence through sheer bloodlust. Back at the garden entrance, Callion confronts Randall, his face pale as he realizes the gravity of the situation. He shouts that Randall has committed treason by leading a foreign army of holy knights into the heart of the palace. Randall turns around slowly, a hauntingly beautiful smile on his face as he simply says, "I know." Randall doesn't even blink, casually asking why on earth that should be considered a problem for him. The MC is stunned by the First Prince's absolute lack of concern for the kingdom's safety. Callion's voice turns cold as he makes a deadly promise to his older brother. He tells Randall that he has the means to kill every single one of those paladins whenever he feels like it. Randall just stares back with those empty blue eyes, his silence more insulting than any retort. They walk together through the roses, Randall noting that these paladins have the same goal as the mages Callion is gathering. Across the courtyard, we see the paladins training, their shields and swords clashing with a rhythmic shing and clang. Callion realizes the truth. The paladins aren't here for the king. They are here to destroy House Burison's influence. Everything finally clicks for our MC as he looks at the golden-haired prince beside him. He finally understands why Evan Burison was missing from the banquet tonight. The fake priests were a Trojan horse, sneaked into the capital to strike at the heart of the noble faction. Callion asks if Randall was the one who summoned Grey Burison to the palace as a distraction. It was a perfect setup, keep the leaders at the palace while the paladins decimated their estates in the dark. The MC's gaze is unwavering, realizing he's dealing with a strategist as cold as himself. He tells Randall to drop the act. If they have nothing to hide, they should have entered the city through proper legal channels. Randall stops, looking at the flowers and admitting he's been curious about something for a long time. He picks a vibrant red rose, asking what could have possibly caused such a massive change in Callion's personality. With a sharp snap, Randall breaks the flower from its stem and announces he's sending the paladins back for now. He crushes the rose in his hand, warning Callion not to grow too tall or let his roots stray from the garden. The red petals scatter in the wind like drops of blood, a clear metaphor for what Randall will do if Callion keeps pushing. Randall turns away, stating that a rose growing out of place simply spoils the scenery. Callion just scoffs under his breath, muttering that his brother's little threat is not happening. A close-up of Randall's eye shows a flicker of something truly monstrous hidden beneath his divine exterior. The MC smirks, vowing to go to Camelin and raise his own hounds to counter Randall's knights. Later that night, the delegation from Tansel departs in a hurry, leaving a formal apology behind. King Romain reviews the note, remembering how Randall told him there was nothing of note regarding the priests. The king realizes his eldest son was far deeper into the Tansilian plot than he ever let on. The realization that his own son lied to his face hits the king like a physical weight. He asks how Randall ended up this way, and Alan bluntly tells him that he only has himself to blame. Alan notes that even the cruelest rulers kept their children close, but the king's indifference is what soured Randall's heart. The king looks down, his silence a painful admission that the archmage is right. He claims he's trying now, the meals, the walks, trying to see what actually interests his children. Alan sips his tea, noting that children have a way of destroying every plan their parents lay out for them. He asks the king if he's ever met the son of Queen Ellen of Liberin. The king remembers the name, acknowledging that the Queen of Liberin is in a class of her own. He mentions that he heard her husband, Prince Thaon, was executed a while back. Alan's face darkens as he remembers his time staying in Liberin during those bloody days. He tells a tragic story. Someone tried to poison the king but ended up killing his own son by mistake. The investigation revealed that Thaon himself was the mastermind behind the assassination attempt. The betrayal was so deep that he was sentenced to death by his own wife to preserve the kingdom. The blade of the guillotine fell, leaving a stain of red that Liberin would never forget. Alan explains that was the moment their other son began to lose his way in the world. The king is shocked to hear that the queen sent her grieving son to clean the house of a servant for an entire month. She placed him in the home of the woman who lost her husband to the prince's own father. The young prince was forced to face the reality of the suffering his family had caused. He watched the servants and commoners, realizing they were people with lives, not just tools for the crown. He saw the tears of those his father had wronged, and the guilt began to change him. The young boy clutched his chest, the weight of the truth finally breaking through his royal pride. Learning the ugly truth behind his father's execution was the only thing that could set him straight. King Romain sits in silence, the lesson hitting closer to home than he'd like to admit. Alan sets his cup down with a clatter, reminding the king that not every lesson can be wrapped in sugar. He warns Romain that he must teach his children that every mistake bears a consequence, regardless of their rank. It's a father's duty to guide them, or they will eventually destroy themselves and the kingdom. The king finally agrees, his hand resting on his knee as he processes the harsh advice. He repeats the words to himself, finally accepting his role as a father first and a king second. As the moon rises, Callian sleeps fitfully, his mind haunted by the burdens his sons are already carrying. Suddenly, a dark vision of a stormy coastline appears, with waves crashing violently against the rocks. A man with a gray beard and a cruel smile towers over a terrified child. The child screams in terror as a massive hand reaches out toward them. With a brutal shove, the man pushes the little boy off the cliff and into the churning sea below. The ocean waves crash violently against the cliffs under a cold, indifferent moon, setting the stage for a memory that refuses to stay buried. In the vision, a younger Byrne looks back in horror as he's told there's no need to make a scene, even as his world falls apart. The eyes of his former father figure are cold as stone, viewing Byrne not as a son, but as a political obstacle that needs to be removed. Byrne is grabbed, the physical sensation of being restrained by those he trusted, fueling a sense of betrayal that still stings years later. He's told that a half-brother with a claim to the throne isn't family, he's just a threat that needs to be pruned for the sake of the crown. The old man wears a twisted, sinister grin, relishing the idea of how Chase will react once Byrne is gone for good. With one final push, Byrne's footing vanishes, and the world tilts into a terrifying freefall. He hits the water with a massive splash, sinking into the freezing depths where the air is quickly replaced by the crushing weight of the sea. His vision blurs and his body starts to go numb, the light from the surface fading as he realizes this is where his first life ends. As he drifts further down, his final thoughts are filled with a heartbreaking why, unable to comprehend a father's cruelty. The light of his life finally flickers out, and the darkness of the deep ocean swallows him whole. Suddenly, a hand reaches out towards a window in the real world, the nightmare finally losing its grip as Callian wakes up. He sits up in bed, breathless and trembling, the ghost of the ocean still clinging to his lungs. He whispers brother into the empty room, the name of the one person who truly loved him in that past life. He thinks back to how he never could quite master swimming, a dark irony considering how he eventually died. Jan bursts into the room, his face filled with genuine concern at the sight of his master looking so shaken. Jan points out that Callian's eyes are puffy and red, clearly seeing that the prince has been crying in his sleep. Callian tries to play it off with a weak lie, claiming he's developed a sudden cat allergy, but Jan isn't buying it for a second. Jan notes that Callian has been acting strange lately, but Callian just brushes him off, asking where the cat even went. Jan clenches his jaw, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness because he knows his prince is carrying a burden he won't share. He turns to leave, stomping away in frustration while Callian watches him, feeling guilty for having to keep so many secrets. The door slams shut, leaving Callian alone with his thoughts in the oppressive silence of the palace. He runs a hand through his hair and lets out a long, heavy sigh, trying to steady his racing heart. He wonders why these dreams are coming back now and tells himself he needs to get it together before the high-stakes banquet begins. Later, Jan comes back, still looking for that cat, but he stops dead in his tracks when he sees who's inside. Across the room, a silver-haired woman sits calmly, looking every bit the noble powerhouse she is. She greets Jan with a formal tone, but there's a sharp edge to her gaze that demands respect. This is Demaria Sigfreed, Jan's sister, and she immediately notices that Callian's eyes are still red from his allergy. Demaria cheekily remarks that his eyes were always red, but Jan snaps back that she knows exactly what he means. Jan thinks to himself that the prince looks like he's been sobbing for days, and the cat allergy excuse is the worst lie he's ever heard. Callian stays quiet, his expression unreadable as he prepares to pivot back into the role of the calculated prince. The scene shifts as we see Chase Secretia standing in a different part of the palace, looking like a ghost of his former self. Chase looks absolutely drained, his heart breaking over the fact that his brother is suffering right in front of him, yet he can't fully reach him. He lets out a tired sigh, the weight of the two timelines feeling like lead on his shoulders. Back with Callian, he pauses and addresses Jan by his full family name, Sigfreed, signaling that it's time for serious business. Jan stares at him, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. This isn't just a master talking to a butler anymore. Callian drops the bombshell. He wants Demaria to attend the royal banquet tonight as his guest. Jan is stunned, asking if Callian realizes the massive political statement that would make to the entire empire. Callian leans back with a cold confidence, explaining that he doesn't need a blade tonight, just the shield of the Sigfreed name. Jan realizes that Callian is planning to use the absolute authority of the Sigfreed house to shut down any opposition. Callian mentions that reaching out to her is easy now that she's in the capital, but he has another reason for this move. Jan is confused why the Sigfreeds would go this far for him, but Callian stays silent, his gaze turning distant. A flash of a memory hits him, Bern and Chase laughing in the sun, followed by the gruesome image of Bern coughing up blood. The terror of that moment, seeing his brother die, is reflected in Callian's eyes for just a split second. He tells Jan it's simply a favor being returned, a cryptic answer that hides a lifetime of debt. Jan is left puzzled, unable to fathom what kind of favor could possibly warrant this much loyalty. Callian looks out the window, knowing that with the pressure mounting, he needs a place to breathe before the war starts. Meanwhile, word spreads that Prince Randall has been grounded in his palace for 3 months as punishment. The official reason is leaving the king's table, but everyone knows it's really about the paladins he tried to sneak in. Chase stands in the shadows, thinking about how Bern always put others first, even the people who didn't deserve his kindness. Chase tells his advisor they are proceeding with their plan, despite the risk, his voice firm and resolute. A small, sad smile touches his lips as he prepares to do what he must for the brother he finally found. He looks at a pair of scissors on the table, knowing that to protect Bern, he has to leave his old self behind. Inside a lavishly decorated room, the sun sets as Chase sits in total silence, the atmosphere thick with a heavy, suffocating sadness. A servant enters with a tray, the sound of the wheels rattling against the floor the only thing breaking the quiet. The servant offers supper, but Chase shuts him down instantly with a cold, hollow no. The servant pleads with him, noting that the prince hasn't eaten a single bite in days and is wasting away. Chase looks at the expensive meal with pure disgust, his stomach churning at the thought of food while his mind is in such turmoil. He sets his tea down with a sharp clink, his patience for the world outside his own head completely gone. He warns the servant not to make him repeat himself, his voice dripping with an authority that borders on desperation. He stands up and walks away, claiming he needs to rest before the banquet, though sleep is the last thing he'll get. The servant can only watch him go, worried that the prince might not survive the night at this rate. The thought lingers. Chase hasn't slept, hasn't eaten, and is running on nothing but raw emotional pain. Night falls over the palace, the grand architecture glowing under the stars, but the beauty hides the viper's nest of politics within. Callian arrives at the entrance, wearing a charming, regal smile as he prepares to step into the lion's den. He greets Demaria, who looks stunning in her formal gown, her presence alone enough to make the other nobles nervous. He promises her he won't keep her long, his focus already scanning the room for potential threats. Demaria looks at him with those bright, intelligent eyes, curious about the boy who commands her family's respect. She takes his arm with a confident smile, telling him she doesn't mind the spectacle one bit. She notes that she is nothing like her father, signaling that she's here to play the game of politics with her own rules. Callian looks at her and realizes that while she looks like Jan, her personality is entirely her own, sharp and formidable. The grand doors creak open, and the bright light of the ballroom spills out, inviting them into the chaos. The announcer bellows their names, and immediately, the room erupts into a flurry of whispers and murmurs. The sight of the third prince walking in with the daughter of the Sigfreed house is like a lightning strike to the nobility. The gossip spreads like wildfire, everyone wondering what this alliance means for the future of the throne. Some even speculate they might be engaged, an idea that would shift the entire power balance of the empire. One noble curses under his breath, wishing he had introduced his own daughter to Callian before the Sigfreeds made their move. They decide to wait for a formal announcement, but the damage is done. Callian has officially marked his territory. After a while, Callian slips out to the garden, taking a deep breath and stretching his tired limbs. He jokes to himself that the constant whispering behind his back almost made his ears burn off. He muses on how much the nobles love their idle gossip, but his light-hearted mood vanishes when he hears a footstep. A voice calls out Callian, and the world seems to stand still. Callian recognizes that voice instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs as he struggles to stay calm. He clenches his fist, telling himself he's held it together this long and he can't fall apart right now. He turns around with a fake smile to greet Prince Chase, but the smile dies the moment he sees him. Chase is standing there, and something is fundamentally different about him. Callian's eyes widen in genuine shock as he takes in his brother's new appearance. In that moment, Callian is hit with a wave of guilt. Why didn't he see the signs sooner? A series of memories flood back, Chase always watching over Bern, their bond being the only light in a dark kingdom. He remembers Chase laughing, challenging him to bets and games, acting as the perfect older brother, and he remembers the crushing grief of the war, where everyone who left failed to come back home. He sees the vision of Chase crying over his body, screaming that he couldn't afford to lose Bern too. In the present, Chase is standing there with his long silver hair cut short, the exact way Byrne used to wear it. Callian can barely breathe as he asks, "Your hair? But why?" Chase admits that he believed he was the only one left who still remembered the old timeline. Callian stares at him, the realization that Chase has been suffering in total isolation hitting him like a physical blow. Chase explains that once he realized he wasn't alone, that Byrne was back, he cut his hair just in case it helped. He gives a soft, heartbreaking laugh and asks if the new look even fits him. The wind whistles through the trees as Callian looks at the brother he thought he'd lost forever. His resolve finally snaps, and his head drops as the weight of everything becomes too much to bear. He thinks to himself, "My name is Callian now," trying to cling to his new identity. But as he looks at that haircut, he knows he can't keep lying to himself about who they are to each other. Tears start to stream down Callian's face as he looks up with a pained smile, his voice breaking. He manages to choke out that the hair suits him perfectly, his regal mask completely shattered. Chase looks at him with such profound love and sadness, his heart breaking for the boy who had to die and come back. They stand there in the moonlight, two souls from another time finally finding each other again. Chase reaches out and pulls Callian into a tight, desperate hug, as if he's afraid he'll disappear if he lets go. He tells his brother to rest, even if it's just for a single moment. Callian buries his face in Chase's shoulder and sobs, letting out all the pain he's been bottling up since he regressed. He whispers "brother" one last time, allowing himself this one moment of weakness before the world demands he be a king again. The scene shifts back to the ocean depths, with the words "the throne means nothing to me" echoing in the dark. We see a young Chase looking down at Byrne in the water, his resolve forming even then. He declares that he never wanted power, he only wanted to protect what mattered. The grief in his eyes is absolute as he makes a silent vow to his dying brother. He promises to spend his entire life as nothing more than Byrne's shadow, ensuring that this time, things end differently. The morning after the banquet brings a fresh start, as Callian prepares to move the next pieces on his board. He's at the training grounds with Duke Slyman, who's laughing as he recovers from their intense session. Callian looks a bit confused, asking what the Duke is laughing about. Arsene chimes in, joking that the prince looks absolutely worn out after the emotional night he had. The Duke starts to say something else, but Callian shuts him up with a swift, playful slap to the arm. The Duke lets out an awe, but he's still grinning, clearly enjoying the rapport he has with the young prince. Callian sips his tea, admitting that there's really no tricking his master when it comes to his mood. Arsene rubs his temples, joking that he's going to start aging rapidly because of the trouble these two cause. He complains that Callian tries to carry every single burden on his own shoulders without asking for help. And as for the Duke? He just makes a massive mess of the training grounds by being too enthusiastic. We see the aftermath. The Duke is literally lying in a crater in the ground, looking like he just got hit by a truck. Callian jokes that he's going to charge the Duke for repairs, but the Duke just laughs it off. Instead of money, Callian says he wants to borrow the Sigfreed manor in Sirius. The Duke's expression turns serious as he asks what exactly the prince needs a secret manor for. Callian leans in with a sharp grin, stating plainly that he wants to hide his elite men there. The Duke is taken aback, noting that's a pretty hefty fee just for a few broken floor tiles. Callian sets his cup down with a firm clack, the negotiation reaching its peak. He wears a predatory grin, knowing he has the Duke exactly where he wants him. The Duke clenches his leg, thinking to himself that his son Jan was right. The prince is way too bright for his own good. He bursts into another booming laugh, the tension breaking instantly. He slaps his knee and agrees, telling Callian he's chosen a fine liege and can have whatever he wants. The atmosphere turns lighthearted again as the Duke starts brainstorming what preparations they'll need. Later, Callian is on horseback, his mind already moving to his next two targets. He needs to meet with Madame Urea of the Arcane Enclave and Baron Pollen of the Traitors Guild. He rides through the town, determined to visit the people who are quietly waiting for his leadership. He's in a great mood, thinking about how lucky he is to be so busy building his empire. Suddenly, a small foot steps into his path, and the horse neighs in surprise. Callian yells for the person to watch out, pulling back on the reins as a hooded figure dashes in front of him. He stops the horse and looks down, his eyes widening as he recognizes the person. The hood slips back, revealing the pointed ears and bright eyes of a young elf. It's Sicia. She beams up at him, calling him chief and saying it's been way too long. Callian is surprised to see her, and she explains that she begged the village elder to let her come so she could see him and Hina. Callian asks if that means Zur is also in town, but Sia's face falls. She reveals that Zur isn't the village elder anymore, her voice filled with a sudden worry. She explains that the chief elder is furious, and Zur and Luca are going to be punished for a long time. Callian is puzzled, as he hasn't seen any elves around the palace recently to warrant such a reaction. Sicia starts chattering away, explaining that the chief wouldn't let them in because of what happened to Callian. She tells him the elder wants to meet his chief to talk about the fallout and the future of their alliance. As they walk, Callian notices that Sicia isn't talking in the strange broken way she usually does. She explains that it's because she found another stone and starts rummaging through her cloak. She offers it to him freely. Her generosity is boundless as ever. She holds out a small dark stone with strange glowing inscriptions on it. She tells him he can have it if he lets her play with Haina, a simple trade for something potentially world-changing. Kalyan stares at the object, shocked to realize there was more than one of these things in existence. The scene shifts to Madame Uria, who is looking at the stone with intense focus, wondering if it can really correct time. Kalyan leans over the table, admitting it's just a theory, but Uria is already hooked by the possibility. She picks it up, asking Kalyan what he thinks the inscriptions actually mean. She notes that Sicia had an ancient alphabet lost to time, and wonders if this is a relic from his past kingdom. Kalyan shakes his head, saying that when he asked about it in the past, he was told it wasn't Sicrian. Uria claps her hands together, deciding she's going to take over the research from here. She stands up, promising to send a messenger to the palace, or visit herself, the moment she finds something. Kalyan agrees, but his expression darkens as he remembers one crucial detail about the stone. He tells her that when he first got his hands on that stone, it smelled strongly of blood. He warns her to handle it with extreme caution, because someone likely lost their life to protect it. Uria smiles, and says she'll keep that in mind as Kalyan prepares to leave for the night. The door creaks as Kalyan steps out into the cool night air, the city quiet around him. He smiles, thinking about how Jan is probably worried sick since he left without saying where he was going. But as he walks through the dark alleyways, a shadow moves, and the sound of a blade being drawn, a sharp shing, cuts through the silence. He's being hunted. The horse whinnies in the quiet night as Kalyan realizes his trip back to the palace just got a lot more complicated. Shadowy figures emerge from the darkness, their presence commanding and lethal as they block his path. Kalyan turns with a sharp gaze, his red eyes piercing through the gloom as he asks these strangers what they want. He recognizes them instantly. They are the warriors of the Great Dunes, a group of nomadic fighters known for their absolute brutality. The Great Dunes is a lawless land of sand and wind, and its people are raised in the harshest conditions imaginable. These warriors are basically human wolves, bred for combat and survival in a world that wants them dead. They're famous for their superhuman strength, often compared to actual wolves for the way they tear through their prey. Each one of them is an elite swordsman, making this 5-on-1 ambush a literal death sentence for anyone else. Kalyan knows that even one of these guys rivals a veteran knight, and facing 5 at once is pushing his limits. He admits to himself that his current body still isn't as strong as his past life, and his mana is far from stable, but he's not going down without a fight, slipping into a combat stance as his resolve hardens. He wonders why there are only 5 of them, suspecting they might have a hidden trump card waiting in the wings. A heavy footstep echoes through the alley as a man with a scarred face and a confident smirk steps into the light. This is Harnan, the leader of this pack, and he looks at the prince like he's already won. Kalyan gives him a simple choice. They can talk or they can fight, as mana begins to swirl around his hand with a low whir. Harnan stays silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the prince with a cold, professional curiosity. Then, a twisted grin spreads across his face, signaling that negotiations were never on the table. With a sudden whoosh, Harnan lunges forward, his blade aimed directly at Kalyan's heart as he chooses violence. The blades collide with a massive clang, sparks flying as Kalyan barely manages to parry the brute force of the attack. The moon hangs high over the city, a silent witness to a battle that could change the fate of the empire. Kalyan huffs, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he feels a sharp sting from a gash on his side. His heart thumps against his ribs, and the deep wound at his waist reminds him that he hasn't felt this kind of danger in a long time. Harnan is surprisingly fast, his movements a blur as he circles the prince like a predator. Harnan taunts him, asking if the little prince is already exhausted, his own wounds closing up with a strange, magical schwa. Kalyan smirks through the pain, noting that his opponent possesses a very interesting and dangerous ability. Harnan's blade begins to glow with an eerie red light, his energy swirling with a menacing whir. They clash again with a heavy thud, the shockwave of the impact rattling Kalyan's bones. They grind their swords against each other, both men staring into each other's eyes with a murderous intensity. The crimson glow from Harnan's blade intensifies, clanging against Kalyan's ice-cold mana. Kalyan realizes the other 4 assassins are casting a silence barrier, ensuring no one in the city hears the sounds of his death. He notes that this red glow is different from his master's fire magic. It's something darker and more primitive. Harnan moves in for the kill with a sharp whoosh, his movements fueled by that sinister energy. The sound of clashing steel fills the barrier as Kalyan fights with everything he has left. He realizes this energy is just like the black stone Prince Randall uses, making the political stakes of this fight sky high. But he doubts Randall is behind this specific ambush. It's too sudden and too sloppy for the first prince. The battle rages on with continuous clangs and clings, neither man willing to give an inch of ground. Kalyan skids back, his boots dragging against the cobblestones as he looks for an opening. He takes a massive leap, deciding to end this now before his strength completely fails him. He dives through the air, his blade glowing with a fierce light as he demands to know who sent this gift. Harnan dashes forward to meet him, his own blade leaving a trail of red light in the dark. Kalyan slides under the attack with a grunt, the physical toll of the move nearly making him collapse. Harnan's face is a mask of pure adrenaline-fueled rage as he tries to overpower the prince. With a final whoosh, Kalyan finds the opening he was looking for, his eyes cold and focused. His blade makes a sickening plunge through armor and flesh, blood splattering against the ground. Kalyan stares Harnan down as blood begins to drip-drop from the lethal wound he just delivered. Harnan lets out a pained awe, coughing up a splat of blood as the prince's blade stays buried in his chest. Even while dying, the assassin lets out a chilling laugh, his teeth stained red with his own lifeblood. He clenches his fist around Kalyan's blade, his grip tightening with a final desperate burst of strength. He mocks the prince, asking if he really thinks one stab is enough to kill a wolf of the dunes. The strange energy flares up again with a fsh, keeping the man alive through sheer force of will, but Kalyan isn't flustered, telling the man it's officially game over for him. The assassin tries to strike one last time, blood flying everywhere as he uses the very last of his energy. Kalyan moves with a sharp whoosh, his face calm as he prepares to finish what he started. He unleashes a massive whirring vortex of wind magic, the air spinning so fast it creates a literal hurricane in the alley. Harnan's eyes widen in terror as he realizes he's not just fighting a swordsman, but a high-level mage. Kalyan smirks, telling the assassin that the wind itself is going to tear him apart from the inside out. The wind rumbles with a deafening sound as the spell tightens around Harnan's broken body. A massive magic circle flares to life and Kalyan declares that the roar of the wind will echo through every wound the man has. He points a finger and whispers wind spear, channeling all his remaining mana into a single, lethal point. With a massive boom, a pillar of light and wind erases Harnan from existence, leaving nothing but a crater behind. The assassin lets out one final, choked kurg as he's torn apart by the sheer force of the spell. Harnan's body falls with a heavy flump, finally dead, as Kalyan watches from the shadows of the alley. Kalyan collapses with a loud thud, his body finally giving out now that the immediate threat is neutralized. He coughs up a gush of blood, realizing he's overexerted his fragile mana circuits and is in serious trouble. He forces himself to rise as he sees the other 4 assassins flinching, their leader's death shaking their resolve. With a bloody grin, he notes that there are 4 of them left, and his hand begins to whir with magic once more. But he doesn't have the strength to fight them all, he needs to get out of there before they realize he's running on fumes. He wobbles on his feet, his vision blurring as he tells himself he has to reach safety. Behind him, the bodies of the fallen mark the path of a battle that shouldn't have been possible. He drags himself along, leaving a trail of bloody steps as he gasps for air. He tumbles to the ground, coughing, knowing that the enemy will stop at nothing to finish him off. He realizes that if he survives, their entire plan will be ruined, making him the most dangerous man in the city. This is his only chance to escape, and he has to take it no matter how much his body screams in pain. He tells himself he has to make it, the darkness of the city feeling like a shroud closing in. His hands tremble with a violent shake, the loss of blood finally taking its toll on his motor skills. With a final desperate thought, he falls into unconsciousness as everything goes black with a heavy thud. Miles away, the house Sigfreed Manor in Sicia stands peaceful under the moonlight, unaware of the chaos. Suddenly, a servant flings the doors open, shouting for the young mistress with a look of pure panic. Demaria dashes outside, her heart racing as she sees a lone, blood-stained horse trotting into the courtyard. She gasps Prince Kalyan as she sees him slumped over the saddle, barely clinging to life. Kalyan slides off the horse with a slump, and Demaria's men rush to catch him, shouting in alarm. Demaria is horrified, her hands shaking as she takes in the sheer amount of blood covering the prince. She sees how deep the wound is, the blood soaking through his expensive clothes as she realizes how close to death he is. She remembers that Kalyan is a man of the blade, someone who shouldn't be easy to take down. She looks at the precision of the strike and realizes this wasn't done by some common thug. She concludes that this must be the work of a master, someone who knew exactly how to hurt him. She wonders why he came here, instead of going straight to the palace where there are more guards. Then it hits her, he came here because he doesn't want the palace, or his enemies, to know he's been wounded. She gives a sharp glance to her men, her mind already working 10 steps ahead. She calls out to her soldiers, her voice echoing with the authority of a Sigfreed. She orders them to kneel and prepare for an attack, knowing that if the prince was followed, the fight is just beginning. She declares that as Sigfrieds, they are the elephant of the empire, and they will crush anyone who approaches. She tells her men they are now his shield, and they will protect him until their last breath. As they carry the unconscious prince inside, the magnitude of the situation settles over the manor. She orders the main gate to remain open, a trap to see who dares to follow the trail of blood. She tells her captain, Jane, to follow the blood trail back and find out everything she can about the ambush. She then tells another soldier, Dakar, to erase every single drop of blood leading to the manor. She turns to Yuran, her most trusted aide, with a look of absolute grim determination. She tells him to find her brother Yan and bring the servant girl Hina immediately. She warns that no one is to know what happened except for Yan, keeping the secret tight. But before Kalyan fully faded out, he had managed to whisper one final request: "Call for my brother." Demaria is stunned, wondering why, of all people, the prince would ask for Chase Secretia. The scene shifts to a different part of the city, where wine swirls in a glass as a man watches the night. He hears the clip-clop of a horse and sees someone riding at breakneck speed through the streets. He looks on with concern, sensing that the fragile peace of the capital has finally shattered. It's Chase, his face a mask of worry as he rides toward the Sigfreed manor with Hina behind him. Hina clings to him, her eyes closed in a silent prayer for the boy she's devoted her life to saving. Inside the manor, a bright glow fills the room as Hina places her hands on Kalyan's chest, her nature magic working to close the lethal wounds. Chase stands by the bed, his face pale as he watches his brother fight for every breath. He mumbles to himself, realizing that Kalyan must have placed an incredible amount of trust in him to call for him now. He looks at Hina, whose magic is the only thing keeping the prince's heart beating in his chest. He lets out a heavy sigh, vowing to live up to that trust and protect his brother no matter the cost. He turns to Lady Demaria, his voice cold and commanding as he prepares to take charge of the situation. He rests a hand on the bedsheet, his mind already spinning a web of political lies to cover their tracks. He tells Demaria that starting now, House Sigfreed must pretend they are holding him hostage. Demaria is confused, noting that there's absolutely no reason for her family to hold a prince hostage. Chase explains that since they don't know who sent the assassins, they can't let the palace take Kalyan back where he'd be protected but isolated. Kalyan chose this manor specifically so he could find the culprits from the shadows without the king's interference. If he returns to the palace, the assassins will just retreat and wait for another chance, and the mystery will never be solved. This needs to play out perfectly so no one is alarmed by Kalyan's disappearance, allowing him to recover in secret. Chase's eyes narrow, his mind calculating every possible reaction from the king and the nobility. He proposes the lie: House Sigfreed has decided to hold the prince until they get answers about the ambush. He asks Demaria if that's a good enough reason, and she stays silent for a moment, processing the risk. Then, she looks up with a sharp smile, the light of battle in her eyes. She tells him it's perfect, and that protecting people is what the Sigfreeds do best, so he should make himself at home. Chase looks at the unconscious Kalyan and thinks about how he's handled all the messy work just like his brother would have wanted. He tells him he's even acting as a hostage for him, so he'd better wake up and finish this soon. Meanwhile, back at the palace, a hand taps against a desk as a pair of glasses sits nearby. Reports are coming in that the prince hasn't returned, and that a group of people left the palace in the middle of the night. The image of Hina riding with Chase lingers in the air, a sign that something is terribly wrong. King Romain sits at his desk, his face a mask of simmering fury as he hears that House Sigfreed is involved. The gates of the Sigfreed manor remain closed, and the family has completely shut down communication with the palace. The king stares down Jan, demanding to know how he's supposed to make sense of his own butler's family acting this way. He asks if he should interpret this silence as an act of treason against the crown. Jan bows his head, begging the king for patience, but Romain's temper is at its breaking point. The king threatens to send the Valcanum and the royal guard to the manor if he doesn't get a real answer immediately. Jan clenches his hands behind his back, the pressure of the moment almost too much to handle. He thinks about how Kalyan must have had a reason for this, but he has no idea what to tell the king to keep him calm. The silence in the room is deafening as everyone waits for the king's next move. Suddenly, Archmage Alan Monosil flings the door open, telling the king he ought to take it easy on everyone. He drops the truth: Kalyan was ambushed by assassins and took refuge at the Sigfreed manor to survive. King Romain is stunned, his eyes wide as he realizes his son nearly died right under his nose. He springs from his chair, his fatherly instincts finally overriding his cold kingly persona, demanding to bring Kalyan back. He's worried about leaving a wounded prince at a manor instead of the duchy's main stronghold. Alan gives a knowing smirk, telling the king that if there were bad news, they would have heard it by now. He reminds the king that Kalyan isn't the type of person to make a rash or stupid decision even when he's hurt. The king lets out a tired ha, the weight of the situation finally making him sag into his seat. He decides it's best to see how things develop for now, his hand covering his face in a rare show of stress. He agrees to wait, though he's clearly not happy about being kept in the dark by his own son. But he makes it clear, the moment anything else happens, he's sending in the heavy artillery, and Alan just smiles. Suddenly, the door swings open and Duke Slyman pops his head in, looking completely baffled. He complains that his own daughter won't let him inside his own house, and asks why everyone is looking at him so strangely. He's genuinely upset, wondering what he did wrong, as the scene transitions to a few days later with feathers fluttering in the air. A messenger bird arrives, and Chase asks for news on Kalyan, only to hear that he still hasn't woken up. He's told the sorcerers of the Enclave are looking into it, and he asks if they should have the birds returned to the palace. Chase tells them there's no need, his hand slipping through the bars of a birdcage with a soft rustle. The reports say there's no noteworthy activity in the capital except for the king tightening security. Chase slides the door of the cage shut, suspecting the enemies are either playing it safe or have retreated to plan their next move. He pauses, a dark and chilling thought crossing his mind. His eyes turn cold as he wonders if the reason there's no activity is that the assassins are all dead. He clenches his fist, the realization that Kalyan might have wiped them all out himself settling in. He looks at the white bird in the cage and wonders who the real solicitor behind this whole mess is. The morning light streams through the window of the Sigfreed manor, signaling that the longest night of Kalyan's new life is finally over. Inside the quiet room, Kalyan lies in a grand bed, his body still recovering from the brutal wounds he took in the alley. A hand reaches out, its fingers trembling slightly as the person approaches the sleeping prince. The shadow of the visitor looms over Kalyan, but there's no malice in the gesture, only a deep, anxious concern. Suddenly, a hand stops mid-air as a voice cuts through the silence, Kalyan revealing he's been awake for a while. Kalyan blinks his red eyes open and sees Prince Planchch standing over him, greeting his brother with a tired but genuine smile. Planchch lets out a small scoff, clearly relieved to see that our boy is still breathing and has his wits about him. He jokingly asks if Kalyan needs more bananas, trying to lighten the heavy atmosphere of the recovery room. A peel drops into the basket with a soft plop, showing that Kalyan has been keeping his strength up while he was out. Kalyan sits up, thanking Planchch but declining any more food, his mind already pivoting back to the political war. Maria enters, looking as sharp as ever, and reports that the messy situation with Marquise Burison is only getting worse. She mentions that the Marquise came by today under the guise of checking on the prince, but he was actually there to demand answers for the abduction rumors. Of course, the Sigfreeds aren't pushovers, and she reveals they flat-out refused to let that snake into the manor. Kalyan munches on a snack, noting that things are going exactly as planned thanks to Maria taking care of business while he was unconscious. He tells Planchch to stop barking, and admits he knew he chose the right people for this high-stakes cover-up. With a chuckle, he asks for more news, and Maria mentions that the Enclave's wizards have provided some interesting intel. Suspicious characters have been spotted surveying the manor and the Burison territory, confirming that the enemy is getting restless. Kalyan's expression suddenly halts, his tactical mind picking up on a detail that doesn't quite sit right. He takes a bite of his food, his eyes narrowing as he processes the wizard's report. He realizes that the enemies have fallen right into his trap, but the ease of it makes him suspicious. He tosses the remains of his food, wondering if this is actually a counter-trap designed to lure him out of the Sigfreed's protection. Regardless, he decides it doesn't matter. He was planning on meeting these people anyway, and he's not about to back down. He looks at his brothers, his resolve hardening for the next move. Planchch asks if Kalyan intends to go alone, his face filled with a protective worry that only a brother could have. Kalyan smiles and asks why else he would have summoned Planchch all the way here, dumbfounding him with his audacity. Planchch realizes that Kalyan is basically announcing he's going to be a burden and needs his brothers to play bodyguard. Maria gives a quick glance, realizing that these royal brothers have a bond that even an assassination attempt can't break. The room is filled with the chitter-chatter of the group as they begin to outline their plan for the night. Kalyan notes that it's only been a few days, but it's absolutely necessary that he starts moving before the trail goes cold. He points out that the enemy is being way too blatant with their exposure, trying to bait him into a mistake. If he locks himself up and does nothing, he won't get any answers, and he refuses to let his attackers walk away. He won't give them the satisfaction of revealing their true aim while he's stuck in a bed. "I refuse to sit back and watch," he declares, his eyes burning with a king's authority. Planchch stares at him, realizing there's no stopping the prince once he's made up his mind. With a sigh, he relents, telling Kalyan to do as he wishes since he clearly can't keep him contained. Kalyan gives a small, rare smile and thanks his master and brothers for their unwavering support. In a moment of genuine warmth, he tells them he missed them a lot, causing roses to practically bloom in the background, much to Planchch's annoyance. The mood lightens as they joke about having such a lovely apprentice, even if he is a tactical nightmare. Kalyan clears his throat with an ahem, getting everyone back on track for the mission. He stands with his team, declaring that they moved tonight to catch the prey that fell for their trap. A dark, predatory grin crosses his face as he imagines the look on his enemies' faces when he shows up alive. That night, Kalyan and Planchch ride out of the manor, the moon providing the only light on their path through the city. Kalyan notes that the Enclave wizards were surprisingly helpful with info gathering, something he didn't expect given their reclusive nature. He points out that the information they provided aligned perfectly with what the messenger birds delivered earlier. The two brothers ride in silence for a moment, the weight of the upcoming confrontation hanging between them. Suddenly, Kalyan pulls back on the reins, his eyes wide as a terrifying thought strikes him. He asks Planchch if the info from the birds and wizards was exactly the same, his voice laced with sudden tension. He realizes that shouldn't be possible. The Secretion spies should have found out much more than a group of mages. He explains that while Madame Urea is a great ally, the Enclave wizards aren't professional information mongers like his own spies. The birds are specialists who spend their lives in the muck, while wizards generally stick to their towers and books. The birds should have seen the trip to the Great Dunes and devised a measure against the ambushers long ago. There is absolutely no way the secretion network failed to notice that level of enemy activity unless something was wrong. Callion's eyes narrow as he realizes the horrifying truth: the information was being filtered. He shouts for his master, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He orders his team to rush back to the palace and find Prince Chase's whereabouts immediately, fearing his brother is in danger. "The birds are the culprit," he yells, realizing that his own spy network has a mole. The shock on his face is absolute. The one thing he trusted most from his past life has been compromised. He concludes that there must be traitors among the secretion spies, men who are selling out their own to the enemy. Knowing they must have something to do with the ambush, he realizes Chase might have been keeping this info from them to protect them. The scene shifts to a quiet building where a small bell jingles as someone enters. A man in noble attire takes heavy steps into a dark, book-filled room, his presence ominous. An older man with yellow eyes and a monocle looks up, asking if the visitor is looking for a book. The visitor turns out to be Chase, and he ice-coldly declares he's here for a face-to-face with the birds who have defected. Chase tells him he's not here for a book, he's here to ask a very important question about loyalty. With a sudden, violent slam, Chase pins Naird's hand to the table, his patience for games completely gone. The room begins to rumble as Alan Manasil releases his mana, the sheer power of a seventh circle archmage making the floorboards shake. Chase asks what they should call a spy who sneaks into another country only to change his mind and sell out his own master. He asks if that's considered simple betrayal or just ordinary conduct for a man of Naird's low character. Alan steps forward with a sinister grin, noting that it's difficult to say, but he's eager to find out the answer. Chase declares that a bird that has abandoned its master can no longer be called a spy, it's just a pest that needs to be dealt with. The door creaks open behind them as Prince Chase's gaze pierces through Naird, who is now visibly trembling. Naird finally breaks, apologizing to His Highness as he realizes he's trapped between a king and a living weapon. He admits that although they've traveled all this way, he has nothing to offer them but his own life. Chase looks down, his expression unreadable as he processes the depth of the betrayal. Alan steps in, warning Naird that he is neither as soft as his apprentice Callion, nor as patient as the prince. He tells Naird he's only going to ask one thing, and the man's life depends on the honesty of the answer. He demands to know if Tansel is the one who hired the warriors to ambush Callion. With a sharp whoosh, a small flame erupts from Alan's palm, the heat instantly drying the air in the room. He asks Naird if he knows what this is, and the man correctly identifies it as a flame spear, a high-level offensive spell. Alan tosses it into the air, explaining that this specific orb of fire won't vanish on its own. It will continue to burn until it melts the heart of the person it touches, a terrifying promise of a slow death. The orb slides across the floor toward Naird, its light reflecting in his wide, terrified eyes. The traitor screams, "Don't tell me," as he realizes he's about to experience the Archmage's legendary cruelty firsthand. Alan grins, asking if the rat really thought he wouldn't notice there were other traitors on the run. He knew they were in trouble the moment Naird warped his mana to try and alert his cohorts. We see a flashback of Alan literally floating through the air with a creak, his presence dominating the entire area. Naird had tried to help his men flee with no concern for his own safety, hoping they would make it out alive. He shut his books and tried to act natural, but you can't fool a man who can read the flow of the world's energy. Alan notes that there are still 8 of them left, giving Naird some time to consider his options before they all die. Naird bites his lip, his gaze dropping as he tries to find a way to buy some time for his people. Alan tosses another orb of fire, the casual nature of the threat making it even more terrifying. Naird screams, "God damn it," begging for at least a few seconds to think through the consequences. But Alan repeats that he is not a patient man, and the room begins to fill with a blinding, searing light. He notes that only 6 fledglings remain in the birdcage, and the heat is only going to get worse for each one that dies. He asks one more time, "Did Tansel solicit the warriors?" The light shuts out everything else as Naird finally gives in to the pain and the fear. He reveals that they were visited not long after the Queen's execution, a time when the power vacuum was at its peak. He was paid handsomely to find someone to take her place, showing that the enemy's pockets are deep. Alan listens as the fire swirls around them, the truth finally coming to the surface. Naird explains that while Tansel might be involved, the warriors themselves don't belong to any single country. Alan scoffs, noting that he already knew that, but Naird clarifies what he really means. He shows them a map, explaining that this is an organization that spans Sicia, Reborn, and Tansel. They are a group of elite individuals from across the entire continent, a secret society with no national loyalty. Alan realizes they'll have to investigate further to find out why people with no connection would gather into such a unit. Naird bows his head, admitting that even he doesn't know the name they operate under. He falls back into his chair with a heavy flump, his spirit completely broken by the interrogation. He begs Alan to refrain from taking any more of his peers' lives now that he's told them everything. With a soft shh, Alan extinguishes his mana, the sudden silence in the room feeling even heavier than the heat. Naird sighs that it's finally over, but Chase cuts him off with one more chilling question. "Do you know the names of the spies who died?" Chase asks, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Naird flinches violently, the realization of his error hitting him too late. Alan points out that for someone desperate to save his peers, Naird sure took his sweet time until 3 of them were dead. The Archmage realizes Naird needed at least one of them to escape so they could call more warriors to this location. He smiles, telling Naird he's lived far too long to fall for a cheap deception like that. The traitor's face turns pale as he realizes his final gambit has failed. Alan unleashes his fire one last time, declaring that no one will be coming to save him. The screen turns white with a massive explosion of mana, ending the traitor's life in a flash of divine retribution. A brilliant glow erupts in the middle of a battle, Callian unleashing his mana with a speed that defies his current physical condition. With a massive thud, one of the remaining assassins is blasted into the ground, unable to even react to the prince's power. Callian takes slow steps toward the fallen warrior, realizing that the location provided by his tainted spies was indeed a lethal trap. A blade makes a sickening plunge, and blood begins to drip-drop onto the cobblestones as the last of the street-level threat is eliminated. He wonders who else is lurking in the shadows, sensing a presence far more powerful than the ones he just killed. A man steps into the light, letting out a long whew as he sheathes his sword, his demeanor surprisingly calm. This is Talon Castron, the land's first swordmaster and a legend among warriors. Callian remembers him from his past life as the man who single-handedly held off the entire royal guard during the Great War, but he also remembers something more personal as 2 more shadows close in on him. With a sharp slice, the enemies are cut down before they can even draw their breath. Callian looks at Talon and realizes this is the man who taught him everything he knows about the blade. Suddenly, a sword erupts in flames, a new enemy joining the fray with a roar. A massive whoosh of fire fills the sky as Alan Manasil arrives, his magic casting a terrifying glow over the battlefield. Talon tells Callian to stay back, knowing he hasn't fully recovered, but Callian smirks, saying he'd hate to be a burden. With a massive boom, Alan clears the rest of the fodder, his 7th circle magic turning the alley into a wasteland. Callian looks at the smoke clearing, revealing the silhouettes of his team standing victorious. He clenches his fist with a dark smile, declaring that it's officially cleaning time for the rest of his enemies. The scene shifts back to the grand Kairos Palace, the morning sun making the architecture look peaceful and untouched. 2 spears whip together to block a doorway, a silent and stern reminder that the prince's freedom has been revoked. Callian lets out a heavy sigh, noting that he didn't expect to be placed under immediate guard the moment he returned home. He groans as he reads the official decree. Prince Callian and Prince Planchch are forbidden from leaving the palace or attending any events. He muses to himself that if he really wanted to, he could leave whenever he wants, guards or no guards. But he decides to refrain for a while, admitting that he did go a little over the line with his secret recovery mission. That day, the traitor network known as the White Hawk officially received the judgment of Prince Chase. 2 glass bottles sit on a desk with a sharp clack, the contents shimmering under the lamp. Chase points out that one is a poison that kills, while the other takes away vision, hearing, and speech, a fate worse than death for a spy. He pushes the more merciful bottle toward the remaining traitor, his eyes cold and unforgiving. With a shatter, the bottle breaks, and Chase makes it clear that the man has no choice in how his life ends. "You messed with something you ought not to have," he warns, telling the traitor to live out his remaining days in despair. After taking care of the mole and the warriors, the entire group finally returned to the safety of the inner palace. The whole disappearance was officially ruled a stunt by the 3rd prince who was feeling pressured by his duties. A perfect cover story. The clock ticks in the quiet room as Callian lies on a couch, his physical probation finally giving him a chance to think. The tick-tock continues as our boy realizes that being bored might be more painful than being stabbed. He springs up, shouting that he has a mountain of stuff to do and can't just laze around like this. Planchch enters, noting that Callian seems fine with walking across the terrace even during broad daylight now. Callian taps the table, asking his brother what exactly he found out while he was managing the palace. He gives Planchch a knowing grin, sure that his tactical brother hasn't just been sitting on his hands. Planchch admits that Callian isn't the type of person who would have returned to the palace unless he had a plan. Callian rummages through his clothes, his expression turning serious as he prepares to show his next trump card. He plops the black stone on the table, noting that the enemies were likely trying to confirm if he could wield its power. Since they heard he became a swordmaster out of nowhere, they suspected he was using this artifact to cheat his way to power. Callian looks at the glowing stone, suspecting it holds a secret even more dangerous than its ability to correct time. He asks Planchch what he thinks about taking over the Burrison territory entirely, a move that would shock the Empire. He argues that with an enemy this powerful, they can't afford to let Cyrus's power remain divided. He has no intention of letting Marquis Evan keep any of his influence after trying to lure him into an ambush. A ripple effect shows Callion's vision for the future, a united front with Planchch at the helm of the northern territories. He tells his brother they can talk more about the logistics later, but he stops when he sees Planchch's face. Planchch begins to stagger back, his face turning pale and his eyes glazing over with a sudden, intense pain. Callion grabs him before he can fall, shouting "brother" in a voice filled with genuine terror. Planchch yanks his hand away, telling Callion to let go with an uncharacteristic sharpness. He walks away, promising to give the proposal a thought, but Callion is left staring at his hand, sensing that his brother is hiding a secret that could destroy them all. Sometimes, the secrets of the past are more dangerous than the enemies standing right in front of you. We start deep within the Arcane Enclave, inside Alan's office. The room is dead quiet, filled only with the sound of pages turning as Alan digs through a mountain of ancient records. He's finally found it, the information on the black stone that Callion asked for, and he needs to get it to him immediately. He hands over a document filled with cryptic text, his hands steady, but his mind racing. Prince Chase looks at the report and can't believe his eyes. The contents are more shocking than he ever imagined. He looks at the messenger, asking if they really investigated this all alone, and gets a simple, confident yes in return. The papers hit the desk with a heavy thud. Chase warns that no one, absolutely no one, can know about this. The messenger is taken aback, realizing the secrecy even extends to Prince Callion himself. Chase stares down at the desk, looking exhausted but determined. He knows Callion asked for this, but the truth might be too heavy to handle right now. The messenger slumps over, defeated by the weight of the secret they've just delivered. Alan interlocks his fingers, staring into the distance and wondering how such a theory could even be possible. The records mention a scholar from 200 years ago named Sion Geraldra, a man who claimed that human hands could create divine artifacts. The idea of a human-made divine artifact sounds like madness, and the sweat on Alan's face shows he knows exactly how dangerous that power would be. Meanwhile, in the throne room, King Romain stands by the window, questioning his advisor about evidence of Tansel's involvement in the recent chaos. The advisor confirms that letters were found in Naird's bookshop, proving a direct line of communication with the Tansilian crown. The letters detailed a clear plot to harm Prince Callion, and the king's expression remains unreadable as he stares out at the grounds. Without a second thought, the king gives a cold, ruthless command: burn them all. The advisor is stunned, asking if they should at least keep them somewhere safe as insurance for the future. The king reaches out, his hand hovering over the stack of incriminating evidence. He explains that the info is likely a decoy meant to hide the real masterminds, so keeping them is useless. With a flick of his wrist, he tosses the paper away, deciding that they won't need these records for whatever is coming next. The scene shifts to a quiet, dimly lit room where the air feels heavy with regret. Callion is there, looking at his hands, his face pale as he realizes something is terribly wrong. He sees his brother Planchch and calls out to him, but the blue-haired prince looks like a ghost of his former self. Callion reaches out to steady him, feeling the physical toll the guilt has taken on his brother. Planchch has become so thin, his body reflecting the mental collapse he's going through. A sharp knock-knock breaks the silence, pulling Callion back to reality. Jan enters the room, announcing that he's brought Planchch's attendant as requested. The attendant, Ian, looks absolutely terrified, his eyes wide as he faces the dragon-eyed prince. Callion gives him a sharp, calculating stare, demanding to know the truth about Planchch's condition. Ian reveals the heartbreaking reality. Planchch has stopped eating entirely. He hasn't slept in days and spends hours just staring blankly out the window, lost in his own head. Callion turns away, his face hardening as he processes how far his brother has fallen. He whispers his brother's name, the weight of the royal burden feeling heavier than ever. Suddenly, a white cat leaps onto the sofa, letting out a soft meow to break the tension. This little furball actually belongs to Callion, but it's famous for liking Planchch way more than its actual owner. Callion looks at the cat, a rare, soft expression crossing his face for just a second. The cat stares back with heterochromatic eyes, seemingly understanding the gravity of the situation. Callion lets out a long sigh, a small smirk playing on his lips despite the chaos. He mutters to himself about having such a high-maintenance older brother. He gives the cat a gentle pat, and the soft purring fills the room, offering a moment of peace. He calls out to Jan, his voice returning to its usual commanding tone. His next order is clear: bring me Sir Hertz. Back in Planchch's room, the blue-haired prince is slumped in a chair, looking completely drained of life. His attendant offers to draw the curtains to give him some privacy, trying to be helpful. But Planchch stops him with a weak gesture, telling him to just leave them alone. The attendant bows deeply, apologizing for overstepping, and prepares to leave. The door creaks shut, leaving Planchch alone in the silence of his massive, empty room. He sits there in the shadows, the light from the window barely touching him as he wallows in his thoughts. He stares with hollow eyes, asking himself a question that haunts every regressor and survivor. What could I have done differently? Dark visions start to cloud his mind, voices of the past telling him they'll get rid of everything in his way. A shadowy figure looms over him, a manifestation of the guilt that's slowly consuming his soul. The voices remind him of all the blood that was spilt just so he could survive. The image of his hands covered in blood appears, a mental shackle of indebtedness that he can't seem to break. He closes his eyes, thinking it would be better if he just disappeared from the world entirely. Suddenly, a massive rumble shakes the very foundation of the building, jolting him wide awake. Planchch springs up from his seat, his eyes wide with shock as the ground continues to tremble. With a series of loud thuds, he rushes toward the balcony to see what's happening. He flings the doors open, the bright sunlight blinding him for a split second. The sound of stone crumbling rips through the air, louder than any thunderclaps he's ever heard. Planchch stands on the balcony, frozen in horror as he watches a massive explosion of dust and debris in the distance. In the reflection of his eyes, we see the unthinkable. The Sicia palace, his mother's legacy, is being leveled to the ground. He can only mutter one thing under his breath. Crazy son of a... Down on the grounds, heavy boots march in perfect unison, the sound echoing off the stone walls. Arsene Hertz leads a squad of mages, his face calm and composed despite the destruction behind him. He points a single finger toward the burning ruins, casually announcing that their target practice was a success. One of the mages, glowing with mana, prepares another spell, being told to pour every bit of energy they have into one final shot. Arsene begins the countdown. 3, 2, as a massive orb of fire forms in front of the mage. A deafening boom rocks the palace grounds as the combined mana is unleashed. The palace spire collapses in a heap of flame and smoke, while Arsene just watches with a cheeky oops. He laughs it off, claiming he totally forgot that the barrier wouldn't be able to handle that much power. Later, Arsene explains the accident to Alan, acting like it was just a simple training mishap. Alan massages his temples in frustration, asking if Arsene really didn't think to stop the mana when the barrier cracked. He stares at Arsene and the group of mages, wondering how 51 people could all be this clumsy at the same time. Alan explains that the entire palace ground is supposed to be protected by ancient, high-level magic. But he reveals a secret. Back when Queen Silic destroyed a floor of the palace, she actually damaged the ancient barrier. That's why 50 measly flame orbs were able to bring down an entire wing of the castle. Arsene just shrugs, a mischievous glint in his eyes as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Alan lets out a long sigh, finally giving up and asking Arsene what he plans to do about the massive repair bill. Arsene remains completely unfazed, grinning as he suggests they just deduct the damages from his pay. Alan clutches his face, muttering about how everyone is making his life so difficult. Night falls over the palace, the sky a deep, tranquil blue that contrasts with the day's chaos. Inside, Alan is playing a game of Jenga, placing a block with precision and asking someone why they aren't speaking. He's sitting across from King Romain, who demands the truth, no matter how much it hurts. The king sips his tea, stating he won't accept that ridiculous excuse about Arsene making a mistake. The two powerful men sit in silence, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a sword. Alan lets out a small, knowing smile, ready to drop a bombshell. He bluntly tells the king that, if they're being honest, the king is the one who really destroyed that palace. A gust of wind howls outside as the king stares at him, completely lost by that statement. Alan points out that the Sicia palace was built on a foundation of the king's own mistakes and blunders. The scene cuts back to Planchch, still sitting on the balcony, looking out at the ruins of his past. Alan continues, saying the palace cast a shadow that refused to disappear as long as it stood. He reaches out and taps the Jenga tower, saying that if something is blocking the path forward, it has to be destroyed. The tower topples over, blocks scattering across the table as Alan asks why the name of the dead should block the path of the living. The king looks shaken, realizing that this sacrifice was the only way to put everything back on track. He lowers his head, admitting that he has no excuse for the mess he allowed to happen. Alan looks at him with a soft, almost pitying smile. He reaches out toward the king, telling him that he has truly changed. He picks up a small leaf that had fallen on the king's shoulder, saying it's now time for the princes to change as well. He tosses the leaf into the wind, watching it drift away into the night. He tells the king they should just watch over them for now, while we see Planchch still huddled on the floor. The leaf lands softly on Planchch's head, a small sign of the world moving on without him. Planchch looks up, his eyes wide and vacant as he stares into the light. He gazes at the pile of rubble that used to be his home, his heart feeling just as broken. He smirks bitterly, realizing he's still looking for something that isn't even there anymore. His eyes narrow as he begins to question everything he's ever known. A shadow looms over the floor as he wonders why he's even still here. He feels trapped, unable to leave the palace even though it represents everything he hates. He wonders if Callian turned the palace to rubble just to free him from his past. Slowly, he begins to rise, his hand trembling as he grips the balcony railing. His heart is pounding as he realizes he doesn't know what to do next. He leans over the edge, asking if he can ever truly forget the scent of the flowers his mother loved. But then, he answers his own question with a cold, hard no. He wonders if he's even allowed to move on after what he's done. He remembers turning his back on his own mother, the guilt rippling through his mind. The memory of letting go of her hands and metaphorically stabbing her in the back haunts him. He looks down at the ground far below, feeling shameless for even wanting to live. He leans further and further over the railing, the darkness of the night pulling at him. His hand grips the stone tight, thinking that it would be better to just end it all right here. But suddenly, a hand grabs his collar and yanks him back. Kalyan has appeared out of nowhere, stopping him with a sharp phew. Planchch is stunned, looking up as his brother calls out to him. He's caught completely off guard, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and embarrassment. Kalyan looks down at him with those piercing red eyes and a wide, cheeky grin, asking, "Why don't we go eat something?" The scene shifts to a much more peaceful setting. The sound of silverware clinking fills the dining room as the two brothers sit down for a meal. Planchch is picking at his food, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. The clack of his fork hitting the plate shows he has absolutely no appetite. Kalyan wipes his mouth with a napkin, casually asking if his brother is actually going to eat anything. Planchch remains silent for a moment, then asks Kalyan what his game is. He admits that he was actually a little scared. He assumes that his timid brother destroyed the palace just for him, but then quickly adds that it's not like the queen was ever really a mother to him. Kalyan just smiles, saying he had another good reason for it, so he figured, why not? Planchch is getting frustrated, asking how many times he has to ask before he gets a straight answer. Suddenly, that white cat from earlier strolls into the room, watching the two of them from a distance. The furball just sits there with its mismatched eyes, looking like it knows exactly what's going on. Kalyan stands up, telling Planchch that he knows a lot of things he shouldn't. He starts listing things off, like how Kiri has different colored eyes, and how Hina is mute and can't speak. And then there's Ian, the attendant who's always by Planchch's side. He looks at a small insect on the windowsill, making a point about how everyone has their own burden to carry. He notes that Alan lost his son, and the king has lost so much more than that. Then he turns his gaze to Planchch, saying his brother has never lost anything, because he's never actually owned anything to begin with. Planchch looks up, his face filled with a mixture of anger and misery, thinking his brother has finally gone mad. But Kalyan drops the biggest truth of all. As for me, I've lost my entire life. Planchch flinches, feeling the weight of those words. Kalyan picks up the cat, looking completely calm as he asks if things aren't fine just the way they are. He tells Planchch that no one in this palace is completely in one piece, they're all broken in some way. He casually suggests that Planchch should move to Camelon and live with a cat, but Planchch immediately refuses. Kalyan smirks, knowing his brother has no interest in a quiet life of exile. He taps on the window, saying he just can't help but keep wondering about the future. Planchch asks, what? His interest finally piqued. Kalyan explains that whether it was out of grace or mischief, a goddess put this curse on him, allowing him to breathe again in the body of someone fated to die. Later, we see Kalyan standing with Chase by the window. He reminds Chase that when they first met, things were very different. Chase reminds him that Kalyan once said he'd even take the throne if it was necessary to achieve his goal. Chase looks at him seriously, asking one final, crucial question. He wants to know if Kalyan has any plans for what happens after he's protected everything he wanted. Planchch, still in his room with the cat, listens intently as Kalyan's words echo in his mind. Kalyan admits that he can't stop thinking about what will become of his life when his use is finally fulfilled. He says that when that time comes, he hopes his bright brother will come to his rescue. Planchch stares into the distance, the weight of that request settling on his shoulders. He looks down at the sleeping cat in his arms, the silence of the room feeling less heavy than before. He realizes something important. I understand now. He sees that just like him, Kalyan is also struggling with his own existence. Planchch grits his teeth, his eyes filling with a new sense of determination. He decides that he'll live his life exactly the way his brother wants him to. He snaps back at Kalyan, telling him to stop his barking and get serious. Kalyan looks at him, a small smile appearing on his face as he realizes his brother is finally back. He gives a satisfied smirk, knowing his plan to motivate Planchch worked perfectly. He tells his brother that he's going to be quite busy for a while, because right now, everyone's eyes are on the Valken and what they'll do next. A clack echoes as a teacup is placed down, signaling the end of one conversation and the start of another. Things have finally settled down after the chaos of the palace destruction. Chase and Alan sit together, Chase asking when the Archmage plans to depart. Alan admits he's still thinking about it. Chase is conflicted, part of him wants to stay and protect Kalyan, but he knows he needs to return to Sicia. He decides that he ought to return soon to handle the brewing trouble back home. It's time for Sicia to prepare for a change of its own, and we see the reflection of a determined prince in his tea. The scene shifts to the training grounds, where the sun is beating down on the dust. Kalyan and Planchch are facing off, swords drawn. Kalyan tells him that if he's going to take over the Burison territory, he has to prove himself. Planchch grips his sword, a confident smirk on his face as he prepares to fight. Callian casually mentions that feeding him was only one reason he destroyed the Sicia palace. With a sudden leap, Callian lunges forward, his eyes glowing with an intense red light. He swings a blade of pure light, saying the other reason was to create a cause that would make the people hand over their leadership to Planchch. Planchch grunts as he barely blocks the strike, the force of it shaking his entire body. Callian looks down at him, his expression ruthless and predatory. He needed the people to think that the most qualified person to lead them through the crisis was none other than Planchch himself. The blades swish through the air as the two brothers engage in a high-speed duel. Planchch pushes back with everything he's got, his blue hair flying as he swings his sword. Clang! The steel rings out as their blades lock, sparks flying from the impact. Callian smirks, a single word escaping his lips. Gotcha. He tells Planchch that he'll deal with Evan himself, his eyes burning with a fire that says the real fight is only just beginning. The palace is finally quiet after the explosion, but for our boy Callian, the real war is just moving behind closed doors. He strides through the hallway, his mind already 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He checks in with Ian, making sure today is the day Planchch, or Prince Plants as he calls him, is meeting with the head of the Burison family. But suddenly, Callian stops in his tracks. A thought hits him and he turns to Ian with a sharp look. He asks if there's anything else on his own schedule for today, and Ian looks a bit confused, confirming the day is technically wide open. Ian immediately goes into protective mode, reminding Callian that he's still on probation and absolutely cannot leave the palace grounds. Callian just brushes it off, looking totally bored. Even so, that nagging feeling doesn't go away. Our MC is positive he's forgetting something important, and it's eating at him. As he stands there, pondering, the morning sun hits the palace gardens, making everything look peaceful while the political world is on fire. A maid passes by, carrying a vase of bright red flowers, and the sight of them triggers a memory deep in Callian's mind. His eyes widen. The realization hits him like a physical blow. He finally remembers what today is, and the weight of it settles in his chest. Right. It's today. He stares at those red flowers, knowing they represent a promise he can't break. The scene shifts to a tense meeting room where fingers are clenching in anger. Marquise Evan Burison sits across from Planchch, looking absolutely miserable. Ever since the Queen was ousted, his power has been circling the drain. The Marquise explains the grim reality. His supporters are deserting him left and right, especially after that kidnapping disaster with the Sigfreed family. Planchch leans back, his cold blue eyes locked on the Marquise. He knows the old man is desperate, and he's ready to exploit that weakness. The silence in the room is suffocating as the two royals stare each other down, waiting for someone to blink. The Marquise mentions the man behind the palace's collapse, clearly suspicious of the accident that leveled his family's legacy. He scoffs at the punishment given to Arsene Hertz, a measly fine that wouldn't even cover the cost of a single window. We see the ruins again, with mages and servants picking through the rubble of what used to be a fortress of Burison power. The Marquise knows that light punishment was a message from the king, proving Callian is now the favorite and the Valkan mages are a force to be reckoned with. He breaks out in a cold sweat, realizing that the political tide has completely turned against him. Word is spreading about the Valkans' power, and their popularity is skyrocketing among the common people and the neutral nobles. The camera zooms in on Callian's red eye. He's become the center of attention, and his enemies are finally starting to feel the heat. The Marquise admits he thought Callian was just a kid clinging to his mother's skirt, but now he realizes the boy is a monster. He looks at Planchch, acknowledging that even the drunken prince has a much better grasp on the situation than he expected. Planchch picks up a knife, the steel gleaming in the light. He asks a dangerous question. If I take the sword, things might turn over. What do you think? The Marquise is stunned, asking what exactly the prince is getting at with a move that bold. Planchch slams the knife into the table with a loud plunge. He demands control of the Laun and Karen knights, offering to split his own mages in return. It's a massive power play. Planchch has a dark smirk on his face, while the Marquise looks like he's just seen a ghost. The Marquise looks at a piece of cake on the table, remembering how he originally thought Planchch joined the mages just to get in Callian's way. But now he sees that every single move Planchch has made has actually helped Callian climb higher. He's realized he was played. The knife clatters on the table as Planchch pushes his luck, sensing the Marquise's hesitation. Planchch's face turns dark. He asks the Marquise if he really thinks he enjoys pretending to be friendly with that bastard, Callian. The Marquise tries to backpedal, saying it's not about trust, but he knows he has no other choice but to follow Planchch's lead. He thinks to himself that Planchch is much more useful than Prince Randall, especially since the rivalry between Callian and Randall is turning into an all-out war. He clenches his fist, deciding that this proposal is the only lifeline he has left to keep his family alive. Very well, the Marquis says, officially handing over the reins of the knights to Planchch. But there's a catch. He leans in with a cold look, telling Planchch that in return, he needs something more than a verbal promise. The sun begins to set over the dragon statues of the palace, casting long, ominous shadows over the grounds. Kalyan is down by the water, looking at a glowing magical flower in his hand. He mutters an apology to someone who isn't there. He can't go to the river today because of his probation, so he's doing a makeshift ritual right here in the palace fountain. He releases the flowers into the water, and they glow with a beautiful, haunting light, floating away like lanterns. He sits by the edge, looking exhausted. This is one of the few moments where we see the weight of his past life really hitting him. The sound of footsteps approaches, and Planchch sits down next to him. Kalyan starts to welcome him back, but something is off. Planchch is dead silent, staring at the water with a look of pure dread. Kalyan's eyes narrow. He reminds Planchch that he promised to keep living, but the ripple in the water says otherwise. We flash back to the meeting. The Marquis tells Planchch that he will hand over the knights, but only if Planchch pledges a seal of oath to never betray House Burazin. Planchch realizes the old man wants him to put his very life on the line. A shadow falls over Planchch's face as he contemplates the deadly contract. With a look of icy resolve, he simply says, "Deal." A vision of a heart wrapped in magical chains appears, the seal of oath. It's a curse that will literally stop his heart if he breaks his word. Back at the fountain, Kalyan is furious. He grabs Planchch, yelling, "What have you done, Planchch?" The two brothers sit by the glowing water, but the mood is anything but peaceful. Kalyan is reeling from the news of the death contract. Planchch just stares ahead, his eyes empty. He's already made his choice, and there's no going back. The seal of oath is no joke. It's a magic spell, inscribed directly onto the heart. If the signer breaks the covenant, they die instantly. Kalyan remembers having a similar contract with Sicia in his past life. He knows the curse only disappears when the other person dies. His mind starts racing. If Planchch is bound to the Marquis, then the Marquis has to die. And he has to die now. Kalyan's red eyes glow with a lethal intensity. He's already planning the Marquis's execution. Planchch notices the look and smirks. He knows his brother isn't the type to let an enemy live for long. He asks Kalyan if he's planning to keep the Marquis alive, knowing full well the answer is a hard no. Kalyan lets out a sharp "ha," the kind of laugh you only hear from someone who's about to end a life. He tells Planchch that his brother knows him way too well. They sit there in the dark, two princes planning a murder. Kalyan asks for the exact conditions of the contract. Planchch tells him it was simple, to not betray House Burazin. Kalyan waits for more, but Planchch confirms that's it. That was the only condition. Kalyan shakes his head, almost laughing at the stupidity of it. "I see. That's it." Planchch is confused by his brother's reaction. He doesn't see what's so funny about a death curse. Kalyan asks if that's really all the Marquis demanded, his voice filled with disbelief. Planchch confirms it, saying the Burazins are just that arrogant. They think a simple oath is enough to control a prince. Kalyan mutters that it's not arrogance, it's just plain stupidity. He's already found the loophole. He scoffs, realizing that while this contract is a hassle, it's actually safer than what the Marquis could have asked for. It's their silver lining. Kalyan decides that he'll know more about Burazin's true plans once he talks to the first prince, Randell. He stands up, telling Planchch they should just wait and see how things develop for now. He tells his brother to go get some rest, acknowledging that today was a massive, life-altering day for both of them. We get a close-up of Planchch's eye, reflecting the glowing flowers in the water. The light is still there, but it's flickering. As Kalyan starts to walk away, Planchch calls out to him one last time. Kalyan stops and looks back, curious about what his brother wants now. Planchch is pointing at the glowing flowers in the fountain, his expression softening for the first time all night. "Get me one of those," he says, looking like a little kid for just a split second. Kalyan's red eye softens. He realizes Planchch needs something, anything, to hold on to right now. He walks back and picks up a glowing blossom, the light reflecting off his face. He hands it to Planchch, who cradles the delicate magical flower in his hands like it's the most precious thing in the world. Kalyan watches from the balcony as Planchch sits by the water, the glow of the flowers illuminating the darkness of the palace. Our boy stands there in the moonlight, looking like a true king watching over his kingdom. A flower and a candle are meant for a person's last parting words. It's a grim reminder of the death surrounding them. Kalyan leans over the railing, thinking about the dead who are currently on their last journey. He reaches out his hand, as if trying to catch the fading light of the blossoms. The flowers float through the air, carried by a magical breeze, creating a trail of light through the dark trees. From high up in the palace, Prince Randell is watching. He stands behind a window, his face hidden in the shadows. He closes the curtain with a swish, cutting off the light from the outside world. Randell stands in his dark room, looking like he's carrying a burden even heavier than Planchch's. Meanwhile, Prince Chase is in his study, looking at a report. His silver hair glows under the lamplight. King Romain enters, but Chase tells him he needn't mind. He's used to working late into the night. Back at the fountain, Ian approaches Callian, looking relieved that the princes are finally done with their secret meeting. Ian notices the trail of glowing flowers in the sky and looks up in wonder. He watches the lights fade into the night, thinking that the third prince is finally finding his true path. The next morning, two maids are gossiping in the garden, talking about the glowing blooms they saw in the sky last night. They thought they were dreaming because it was so beautiful, but they can't help but wonder what it was actually about. Prince Randall walks past them, his face a mask of cold indifference. The maids immediately bow and go quiet. Randall's eyes are fixed forward. He looks like he's walking toward a fate he can't escape. Sudden changes and unexpected developments are popping up everywhere in the palace. But Callian knows that this is only the beginning. The start of all this was around 1 year ago. At this exact time of the year, we see a pair of boots walking through a bed of roses, the red petals contrasting with the dark leather. It's Callian. He's sitting on the ground, looking up at the sky with a calm expression. He reaches out and touches a rose, his movements gentle and deliberate. Everything in Kyrus began to change when he changed, when the soul of Byrne took over this body. Randall approaches and tells the servants to excuse themselves, wanting a private word with his brother. The two brothers stand in front of the rose hedge, the tension between them higher than it's ever been. Callian gives him a sharp, mocking smile, saying he thought Randall would at least ask if he was doing better now. Randall doesn't play along. He looks at Callian with those cold blue eyes and asks, "What is it that you want?" He demands to know why Callian insists on engaging with him face-to-face instead of through messengers like a normal noble. Callian's answer is simple, "I'm curious, you see." He taps a rose with his finger, telling Randall he's curious about what the first prince knows and what he's hiding. He leans in, his red eyes locking onto Randall's blue ones. He wants to try this thing called a conversation. He asks Randall directly about his power. What is it? And what does he know that Callian doesn't? Randall clenches his hand over his chest, his heart pounding visibly under his clothes. Callian asks what more will be derailed and what Randall's relationship is with the country of Tansel. A vision of Randall's heart appears, and it's also wrapped in magical chains. Thump, thump. Randall looks like he's in pain as the magic around his heart reacts to Callian's questions. How much will he be able to actually say? Callian isn't backing down. He repeats the question. What is that power? What are you hiding from me? He asks about Randall's link to Tansel, wondering if the magic is so faint that Randall can't even sense the danger he's in. Randall stands there, his face a pale mask. He looks like a man who's been cornered by a predator. Callian watches him closely, waiting for any sign of a lie or a slip-up. A puzzle piece visual appears. The mystery of Randall's power is the missing piece of the entire plot. We see flashes of Randall's memories, his time in the palace, and the dark influence that has been guiding him since he was a kid. Suddenly, a blast of magical energy interrupts the thought, forcing them both back into reality. Callian's eyes widen. He asks Randall if that power has something to do with the Halidom of Tansel. Randall gives a small, slow nod, but he looks like it's taking everything he has just to move his head. Callian realizes Randall is literally unable to speak. Callian's face hardens. He realizes the situation is even more complex than he thought. He asks if Randall invited the Tansilian paladins into the city just to destroy House Burison. Did he make a contract with them? The shadows of the two princes stretch across the ground, long and distorted. He asks if Randall's hatred is actually pointed at the king himself. Randall's eyes flare with a sudden, hidden emotion. Suddenly, Ian comes running toward them, shouting for Callian. The tense moment is broken. Callian turns away, frustrated. He asks Ian where they're supposed to be going now. He lets out a long sigh, realizing Randall isn't going to give up any more info today. He tells Randall that if none of what he said applies, then Randall should just leave this place. Randall walks away, muttering how tiring under his breath. He looks like a man carrying the weight of the world. Callian watches him go, thinking about the contract. It's no shoddy magic, it's high-level divine binding. He realizes Randall offered his help to Tansel in exchange for the power he was given, and he's now trapped under a seal of oath. If Callian wants to understand why, he needs to learn about Tansel's internal politics, and he needs to do it fast. He starts walking toward another part of the palace, his boots echoing step step on the stone. He knows the only person in the city who can help him with this kind of top-secret intel. But his path is blocked by two armored knights. They tell him he's not permitted to leave this wing until the end of the day. Callian doesn't even slow down. He looks at them with those dragon eyes and says, "Yeah? Then stop me. If you can, that is." The air around him starts to vibrate with pure, unadulterated power. In a flash, he grabs one of the knights by the collar, showing a level of speed and strength that terrifies them. Ian watches from a distance, his eyes wide with shock. He's never seen the prince be this aggressive. Ian quickly steps in, telling the guards that Callian won't be leaving the palace grounds, so they should just make way. Callian arrives at Prince Chase's room and gives a sharp knock on the door. Chase is sitting on his sofa, reading a book. He looks up, surprised by the sudden visit. He asks who, as the door opens, and he sees Callian standing there. Callian enters, apologizing for barging in without notice. He looks like a man on a mission. He bluntly tells Chase that he's not familiar with Tansel and wants to know everything Chase recalls about them. Chase closes his book and smiles. I see. Come on in then. Chase's attendant bows and quietly leaves the room, closing the door behind him. The door shuts with a soft shut, leaving the two brothers alone to discuss the fate of kingdoms. Chase starts pouring tea, admitting that even in the past life, there wasn't much they knew about Tansel's secrets. However, he says that if it's regarding the Tanselian crown, and how Prince Randall eventually became their king in the other timeline, he knows exactly what happened. Chase mentions a famous accident where a carriage axle broke, killing both the current king and the crown prince of Tansel. Callian doesn't believe it was an accident for a second. He asks Chase exactly when this happened. Chase pours the tea and says it would be September of next year, though he doesn't know the exact date. After that incident, Randall was crowned the king of Tansel in the previous timeline. We see a vision of Randall sitting on a throne, looking miserable and trapped, even with all that power. Furthermore, in November of that same year, Planchch was appointed the Crown Prince of Kyrus. Chase points out that even if Randall had stayed in Kyrus, the title of Crown Prince would have still gone to Planchch. The chandelier light glints off the tea as the two men piece together the dark history of their world. Chase explains the power structure. Silik ruled the court, while the Burasans controlled the army outside. The Lannan family had a monopoly on trade, and the Greys united the lords under them. It was a complete stranglehold. Which leads them to one undeniable fact. Either Randall wanted to be the king of Tansel from the very start, or someone else forced that fate upon him. Callian places his cup down with a sharp clack. He's deep in thought. Chase suggests a third option. Maybe Randall simply didn't want to die. He realizes there must be a faction within Tansel that opposes the current king and wants Randall on the throne. Someone coaxed Randall into becoming king just so they could use him as their hands and feet, their puppet. A drawer rattles open, revealing a hidden document. It's a mirror image of how the Burasans used to run Kyrus. Chase explains that unlike Kyrus, there are multiple factions fighting for control in Tansel. He hands Callian a thick stack of papers, a detailed document he authored himself. Callian takes it, a small smirk on his face. Normally, Chase wouldn't hand over something this valuable to anyone. He thanks Chase, apologizing again for the sudden visit and the constant demands for info. Chase smiles warmly. He tells Callian it's fine, because while it was sudden, he was hoping to say his farewell too. Callian stops, his heart dropping. By farewell, do you mean? Chase's smile is sad but determined. He's done everything he can for Callian here. I'll be departing tomorrow. The words hit the air like a final judgment. Chase looks at Callian, his purple eyes filled with a brother's love. It's time for him to return to Sicia and handle his own war, leaving Callian to finish the fight in Kyrus alone.